Chapter 1. The Heart's Theft. The desert was a furnace. Its heat, a living thing that pressed against Dr. Evelyn Carver's skin as she stood before the unearthed stone door. It was June 1925, and the Valley of the Kings sprawled around her, a graveyard of secrets baked under an unrelenting Egyptian sun. Her team, 6 weary souls, had toiled for weeks, chasing whispers of a tomb no one else dared seek. The locals called it cursed, the resting place of a pharaoh whose name was erased from history, his legacy sealed behind warnings of wrath. Evelyn, at 38, was no stranger to such tales. A decade of archaeology had taught her to sift truth from myth. Yet the air here felt different, heavy with an expectation she couldn't shake. The door before her was carved with hieroglyphs, spirals, eyes, a heart pierced by a blade. Lila, the team's linguist, traced the symbols with a trembling finger, her voice low. "It speaks of a vow," she said, "a heart that binds the dead." Evelyn nodded, her pulse quickening, not with fear, but with hunger. This was her moment, the find that would carve her name into history. The laborers, Amir, Hassan, and Kareem, worked in silence, their picks chipping away at centuries of sand until the door groaned open, revealing a darkness that seemed to breathe. Torches flared, casting jagged light across walls etched with scenes of a king betrayed, his chest torn open, his eyes fixed on a shadowed figure. Thomas, the surveyor, muttered about the tomb's impossible depth, his maps useless against its twisting corridors. Marcus, the photographer, snapped pictures, his lens catching glints of gold. Amulets, jars, a sarcophagus that hummed faintly, as if alive. Evelyn led the way, her boots echoing on stone, her mind racing with possibilities. The air grew colder, thicker, the deeper they went, until they reached a chamber no larger than a cell. At its center sat an obsidian box, its surface crawling with inscriptions. Lila's translation came in a whisper, "The heart of the king binds his wrath. Take it, and his shadow walks." Evelyn's laugh cut through the stillness, sharp and brittle. "Folklore," she said, but her voice wavered. The box was heavy, its lid unyielding until her fingers found hidden catch. Inside lay a mummified heart, wrapped in linen, pristine as if it had stopped beating hours ago. It was grotesque, beautiful, impossible. Her hands moved before her mind could protest. Lifting the heart, feeling its weight, its warmth. The air shifted, a sudden pressure that made the torches flicker. Shadows danced, stretching into shapes that didn't match the team's silhouettes. Amir dropped his pickaxe, his eyes wide, muttering about a figure in the dark, tall, cloaked, its eyes like embers. Evelyn snapped at him to focus, but her heart pounded, syncing with a rhythm she couldn't explain. The organ in her hands twitched, or so she thought, a fleeting pulse that made her stomach lurch. She slipped it into her satchel, ignoring Lila's plea to leave it, ignoring the way the tomb seemed to watch as they retreated. Back at camp, the desert turned hostile. The wind rose, a howl that carried voices, low, guttural, weaving words no one could grasp. Tents rattled, their canvas snapping like bones. Evelyn sat in her tent, the heart hidden beneath her cot, its presence a weight against her mind. She tried to write in her journal, to catalog the day's find, but her pen stalled. The hieroglyphs haunted her, their meaning clearer now. A pharaoh betrayed by love, his heart bound to a curse that tethered his soul to the earth. She shook her head, blaming exhaustion, but sleep brought no relief. Her dreams were stolen by a man with a crown of vipers, his chest bleeding, his voice a hiss of accusation. "You took what is mine," he said, and the sand around her turned to blood. She woke to a scream, Amir's, she thought, but it was too raw, too close. Dawn revealed his tent empty, his bedroll untouched, his tracks erased by a wind that left no other mark. The team gathered, their faces pale, their voices sharp. Thomas blamed bandits, his hands clutching a useless map. Lila clutched her notes, muttering about curses, her translations now laced with pleas for forgiveness. Marcus showed a photograph, his fingers unsteady, revealing a silhouette in the dunes. Too tall, too thin, its edges fraying into the night. Evelyn felt their eyes on her, heavy with blame. She denied it, her voice firm. But the heart's rhythm pulsed in her ears, louder now, undeniable. It was changing her, whispering truths she didn't want to hear. The tomb wasn't just a grave, it was a prison, and she'd stolen its key. The locals had spoken of Keeper, a guardian of dust and wrath, bound to protect the heart. She'd laughed then, but now she felt his gaze, a pressure behind her eyes. A whisper in the dark, return the heart, or become its next vessel. The desert was no longer empty, and something was coming for her. The camp was a fragile thing, a cluster of tents clinging to the edge of a desert that seemed to resent their presence. Dr. Evelyn Carver stood at its center, the morning sun casting long shadows that twisted like fingers across the sand. Amir's disappearance had cracked the team's resolve, and the air was thick with suspicion. Thomas paced, his boots kicking up dust, muttering about thieves or deserters, but his eyes darted to the dunes as if expecting something worse. Lila sat cross-legged, her notebook open, her pen scratching out hieroglyphs that no longer felt academic, warnings of a heart that bound wrath, of a shadow that walked. Marcus, usually unflappable, clutched his camera like a talisman. His photograph spread on a crate, each one showing that impossible silhouette from the night before. Hassan and Kareem, the remaining laborers, whispered in Arabic, their gazes fixed on Evelyn, heavy with accusation. She felt the heart's weight in her satchel, hidden in her tent, its pulse a faint echo in her chest. She told herself it was imagination, stress, the desert's cruel tricks. But the truth was clawing at her, sharp and undeniable. Evelyn called the team together, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Amir likely wandered off, she said, forcing conviction into the lie. We'll search at first light tomorrow. For now, we focus on the tomb, cataloging, documenting. This is why we're here. Thomas snorted, his face red from heat and doubt, but he nodded. Lila's eyes met Evelyn's, wide with something like pity, before she returned to her notes. Marcus said nothing, his fingers tracing the silhouette in his photograph, a figure that shouldn't exist, too tall, its edges fraying into the dark like smoke. The laborers didn't move, their silence louder than words. Evelyn turned away, her jaw tight, and retreated to her tent. The heart was there, wrapped in linen, its obsidian box glinting in the dim light of her lantern. She hadn't meant to keep it. Not really, just to study it, to understand its power. But now it felt like a chain, binding her to something she couldn't name. The day passed in a haze of work, the team moving like ghosts through the tomb's chambers. Evelyn supervised, her clipboard a shield against their unspoken questions. The sarcophagus drew her eye, its surface carved with scenes of a pharaoh betrayed, a lover's dagger, a heart torn free, a vow that sealed his soul to the earth. Lila's translations grew frantic, her voice low as she read from the walls. The keeper guards the heart, his eyes the desert's wrath. Steal it, and the sand will drink your blood. Evelyn snapped at her to focus on artifacts. Not myths, but the words lingered, heavy as the air. Marcus's camera clicked, capturing amulets and jars, but he lingered on the shadows, his lens catching shapes that made his breath hitch. Thomas mapped the corridors, his curses echoing as they twisted back on themselves, defying logic. Hassan and Kareem carried crates, their movements slow, their eyes never leaving Evelyn. She felt their judgment, their fear, and it fueled her resolve. She was no thief, she told herself, just a scientist, a guardian of knowledge. Night fell, and the desert turned predator. The wind howled, tearing at the tents, carrying those same guttural voices, ancient, angry, weaving words that slithered into Evelyn's mind. She sat alone, the heart in her hands, its linen wrapping stained with something dark, something that hadn't been there before. It was warm, heavier now, and when she pressed her palm against it, she swore it beat, slow, deliberate, syncing with her own pulse. Her tent flap rustled, and she flinched, expecting the keeper, that figure from Amir's panic, from Marcus's photographs. But it was Lila, her face pale, her notebook clutched like a lifeline. "You need to read this," she said, thrusting a page at Evelyn. The hieroglyphs were crude, drawn in haste, but their meaning was clear. The heart was a key, a prison for a pharaoh's rage, and its theft had woken something older than death. "We have to put it back," Lila whispered, her voice breaking, "before it takes us all." Evelyn's laugh was hollow, a sound that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a relic, Lila, nothing more." But her hands tightened around the heart, possessive, defiant. Lila's gaze hardened, and she left without another word, her shadow swallowed by the night. Evelyn tried to sleep, but the desert wouldn't let her. The voices grew louder, chanting a name she couldn't grasp, and her dreams were stolen by the pharaoh, his crown of vipers, his chest bleeding, his eyes burning with betrayal. "You took what is mine," he hissed, and the sand around her turned to blood, warm and sticky against her skin. She woke to a scream. Not Amir's this time, but Hassan's, raw and guttural, cut short by a silence that was worse. She stumbled from her tent, lantern in hand, and found the camp in chaos. Hassan's tent was shredded, its canvas flapping like a wounded thing, and the sand inside was dark, wet, reeking of iron. He was gone, just like Amir, his tracks erased by a wind that left no other mark. The team gathered, their faces gray in the lantern light. Thomas's voice cracked, accusing Evelyn of bringing this curse upon them. Marcus held up a new photograph, his hands shaking, showing that silhouette again. Closer now, its eyes glowing like embers, its form fraying into the dark. Lila clutched her notebook, tears streaking her face, muttering about the keeper, the heart, the blood the sands would drink. Kareem stood alone, his eyes fixed on Evelyn, his hand on a knife at his belt. "You took it," he said, his voice low, steady. "You brought this." Evelyn's denial was sharp, but it faltered under their stares. The heart's pulse was louder now, a drum in her chest, and she felt its truth. She hadn't just stolen a relic. She'd woken a vengeance that knew her name. The desert was watching, its shadows moving, and the keeper was no longer a myth. He was here, his gaze a weight behind her eyes, his whisper a command: return the heart, or become its vessel. The camp was a wound, its tents sagging under the weight of a desert that seemed to tighten its grip with every passing hour. Dr. Evelyn Carver stood frozen, the lantern in her hand casting a feeble glow against the darkness that swallowed Hassan's shredded tent. The sand inside was still wet, the iron stench of blood thick enough to choke on. Kareem's accusation hung in the air. "You took it. You brought this." And the remaining team members' eyes bored into her, their fear sharpening into something dangerous. Thomas clutched a shovel like a weapon, his face a mask of sweat and rage. Lila's notebook trembled in her hands, her lips moving silently, reciting warnings from the tomb's walls. Marcus, pale and silent, held his camera, but his photographs were scattered on the ground, each one showing that fraying silhouette. Closer now, its ember-like eyes fixed on the camp. Evelyn's satchel felt heavier, the mummified heart inside pulsing with a rhythm that drowned out her thoughts. She wanted to deny it, to call them fools, but the heart's beat was a truth she couldn't escape. "We need to stay calm," Evelyn said, her voice thinner than she intended. "Hassan could be injured, lost in the dunes. We'll search at dawn." Thomas laughed, a bitter sound that cut through the wind's howl. "Lost? Like Amir? You think we're idiots, Carver? Something's hunting us, and it started when you took that thing." He pointed at her satchel, and Evelyn's hand instinctively covered it, a gesture that felt like a confession. Lila stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "The inscriptions warned us, Evelyn. The heart binds the Pharaoh's wrath. We have to return it, now, before it takes us all." Kareem's knife glinted in the lantern light, his eyes never leaving Evelyn, and for a moment, she wondered if the desert was the only threat. Marcus said nothing, but his gaze flicked to the dunes, where the shadows seemed to shift, too fluid, too alive. Evelyn retreated to her tent. The team's silence louder than their accusations. The heart lay on her cot, its linen wrapping stained darker now, the obsidian box beside it glinting like a predator's eye. She sat, staring at it, her fingers itching to touch it, to feel its warmth. It was impossible, she knew. A dead organ couldn't beat, couldn't pulse like a living thing. Yet when she pressed her palm against it, the rhythm was undeniable, slow and deliberate, syncing with her own heartbeat. Her journal lay open, its pages filled with sketches of the tomb's hieroglyphs, but her notes felt like lies now. The pharaoh's story was no longer academic, it was personal. Betrayed by a lover, his heart torn free, his soul bound to a curse that refused to die. The keeper, the locals had said, was his guardian, a creature of dust and wrath tasked with protecting the heart. Evelyn had scoffed at their fear, but now she felt him, a presence behind her eyes, a whisper in the dark. Return the heart, or become its vessel. Sleep was a thief, stealing her into dreams that weren't her own. The pharaoh stood before her, his crown of vipers hissing, his chest a gaping wound that bled sand. "You took what is mine," he said, his voice a blade that cut through her. The desert around her churned, spitting up bones, amulets, eyes that watched from the dunes. She woke to a sound, a low, rhythmic thump, not from her chest, but from the heart on her cot. It was louder now, insistent, and the air in her tent was thick, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. She stumbled outside, her lantern flickering, and found the camp unnaturally still. The wind had died, leaving a silence that pressed against her eardrums. The dunes glowed under a moon too bright, too red, and in the distance, she saw it, a figure tall and fraying, its edges dissolving into the night. Its eyes burned like embers, fixed on her, and when it moved, the sand didn't shift beneath its feet. Evelyn's scream caught in her throat. She backed toward the camp, her lantern swinging wildly, but the figure was gone when she blinked. Her team was awake now, drawn by her panic, their faces pale in the moonlight. Thomas gripped his shovel, shouting about bandits, but his voice faltered when he saw her expression. Lila dropped her notebook, its pages fluttering, revealing sketches of the keeper, tall, cloaked, eyes like fire. Marcus's camera clicked a desperate sound, and he whispered, "It's closer." Kareem's knife was drawn, his knuckles white, but he didn't speak, his gaze locked on the dunes. Evelyn's satchel burned against her hip, the heart's pulse a drum that drowned out reason. "We need to go back to the tomb," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "We need to put it back." Lila nodded, tears streaking her face, but Thomas laughed, a sound that bordered on madness. "You think that'll save us? You woke it, Carver. It knows you." The argument was cut short by a sound, a low, guttural chant, rising from the desert like a tide. It wasn't human, wasn't animal, but it carried a name, a word that twisted in Evelyn's mind. Ankit. The pharaoh's name, erased from history, now alive in the night. The sand shifted, forming spirals, eyes, hearts that pulsed in time with the one in her satchel. Marcus's camera fell from his hands, his photographs scattering, each one showing the keeper, closer, clearer, its form fraying into claws and shadow. Lila grabbed Evelyn's arm, her voice a hiss. "It's him, the keeper. He's here for the heart." Evelyn wanted to deny it, to cling to science, to reason, but the heart's beat was a truth she couldn't ignore. It was calling not just to her, but to something older, something that remembered her sin. The desert was no longer a place. It was a predator, and she was its prey. Chapter 2, Whispers in the Sand. The desert had become a living thing, its sands shifting with malice under a moon that hung too low, too red. Dr. Evelyn Carver stood at the edge of the camp, her satchel clutched to her chest, the mummified heart inside beating with a rhythm that drowned out her own. The team was fractured, their faces pale in the lantern light. Thomas gripping his shovel like a lifeline, Lila clutching her notebook as if it could ward off the night, Marcus staring at his scattered photographs, and Kareem, silent, his knife glinting with unspoken intent. The chant from the dunes, Ankit, Ankit, had faded, but its echo lingered in Evelyn's mind, the Pharaoh's erased name now a weight she couldn't shake. The keeper's presence was no longer a shadow in dreams or photographs. It was here, its ember-like eyes watching from the dark, its form fraying into the night. Evelyn's words from moments ago, "We need to put it back," hung between them, a confession and a plea. But the desert didn't care for apologies, and the heart in her satchel pulsed with a hunger that felt like her own. Dawn was hours away, but sleep was impossible. Evelyn ordered the team to fortify the camp, a futile gesture against a foe that didn't bleed or breathe. Thomas and Kareem dragged crates to form a barrier, their movements jerky, their eyes darting to the dunes where the sand still bore those unnatural spirals, eyes, hearts. Lila sat by the fire, her notebook open, transcribing the chant she'd heard, her pen scratching out fragments of a language older than Egypt itself. Marcus retrieved his photographs, his hands trembling as he sorted them, each one showing the keeper closer. Its form clearer, tall, cloaked, its face a void save for those burning eyes. Evelyn watched them work, her mind racing. The hearts beat a drum that urged her to act. She wanted to believe she could return it, that the tomb would accept her offering and release them. But the keeper's whisper, "Return the heart, or become its vessel," felt like a sentence, not a choice. The wind returned, sharper now, carrying a grit that stung like needles. It sculpted the sand into new shapes, glyphs that matched the tomb's walls, warnings Lila had translated. The heart binds the wrath. Steal it, and the sands drink blood. Evelyn's satchel grew heavier, the heart's pulse louder, and she felt a pull, not toward the tomb, but deeper into the desert, where the dunes seemed to part, revealing a path that hadn't been there before. She shook her head, blaming exhaustion, but Marcus's voice cut through her thoughts. "Look," he whispered, holding up a photograph taken minutes ago. The keeper was there, standing at the camp's edge, its form fraying into claws that reached for the firelight. Lila gasped, dropping her notebook, its pages fluttering to reveal sketches of the same figure, tall, cloaked, eyes like fire. Thomas swore, his shovel raised, but Kareem only stared, his knife steady, his gaze fixed on Evelyn. "It wants you," he said, his voice low, certain. Evelyn's denial was automatic, but it faltered under the weight of their stares. She turned to the dunes, where the sand was moving, not with the wind, but against it, forming a circle that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of dust and decay, and the chant returned. "Ankit, Ankit," louder now, a chorus of voices that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The fire dimmed, its flames bending away from the dunes, and Evelyn felt the heart in her satchel twitch. A violent jolt that made her gasp. Lila grabbed her arm, her face streaked with tears. "It's calling him," she said. "The Pharaoh. The heart's waking him." Evelyn wanted to laugh, to cling to reason, but the sand was bleeding now, dark and wet, pooling in the circle's center. Marcus's camera clicked a desperate sound, and he whispered, "It's moving." The keeper was there, not in a photograph, but in the flesh, or whatever passed for flesh, its form fraying into the night, its eyes fixed on Evelyn. Panic seized the team. Thomas swung his shovel at the air, shouting about bandits, but his voice cracked when the sand beneath him shifted, forming a hand that clutched his ankle. Kareem lunged, his knife slashing at the grains, but they reformed, relentless. Pulling Thomas down, Lila screamed, her notebook forgotten as she dragged Thomas back, his leg bleeding from wounds that shouldn't exist. Marcus dropped his camera, his hands clawing at his face, muttering about eyes in the dark. Evelyn stood frozen, the heart's pulse a roar in her ears, its warmth spreading through her veins. The keeper moved closer, its form dissolving and reforming with each step, its whisper a blade in her mind. "Return it, or become it." The sand circle pulsed faster, the blood pooling higher. And Evelyn saw it. A figure rising from the center. Not the keeper, but something worse. Its crown of vipers hissing. Its chest a gaping wound that bled sand. She ran, not toward the camp, but the tomb. Her satchel bouncing against her hip, the heart's beat driving her forward. The team's shouts faded, drowned by the chant. Ankit, Ankit, and the desert's wrath. The tomb's entrance loomed, its stone door ajar as if waiting. Evelyn stumbled inside, her lantern flickering, the walls closing in. The hieroglyphs seemed to move, their scenes of betrayal sharper now. The pharaoh's lover. Her dagger, his heart torn free. The heart in her satchel was burning, its pulse a scream, and Evelyn felt it changing her, weaving her thoughts with his. She reached the chamber where she'd found the obsidian box, its surface glinting like a predator's eye. The keeper was there, not behind her but inside her mind, its voice a hiss. Return it, or become it. Evelyn's hands shook as she lifted the heart, its linen wrapping frayed, its surface slick with something that wasn't blood. The tomb shook, a low rumble that sent dust cascading. And she knew the pharaoh was close, his wrath no longer bound to the sands. The tomb's chamber was a cage, its walls pressing closer as Dr. Evelyn Carver stood clutching the mummified heart, its pulse a violent rhythm that shook her bones. The air was thick with dust and the reek of decay, the lantern's light flickering as if afraid to touch the shadows. The obsidian box sat before her, its surface carved with warnings that seemed to writhe under her gaze. Hieroglyphs of a pharaoh betrayed, his heart torn free, his wrath bound to the earth. The keeper's voice echoed in her mind. Not a whisper now, but a command. Return it or become it. The heart burned in her hands, its linen wrapping frayed, slick with a dark fluid that seeped between her fingers. The tomb rumbled, a low growl that sent cracks spiderwebbing across the ceiling, and Evelyn felt the pharaoh's presence. Ankit, his name a weight in her chest, his rage a heat that wasn't hers. She wanted to drop the heart, to flee, but her body refused, tethered to the relic as if it owned her. The desert outside was no longer a refuge. It was a battlefield, and she'd left her team to its mercy. Her lantern sputtered, casting jagged shadows that moved without reason, shapes of vipers, claws, eyes that watched from the walls. Evelyn's breath hitched as she forced herself to the obsidian box, its lid heavy, unyielding. She pried it open, the heart in her hands twitching violently, as if resisting its return. The chamber shook harder, dust choking the air, and she heard it, a chant, not from the dunes but from the tomb itself. Ankit, Ankit. The name was a pulse, syncing with the heart, with her own heartbeat, and for a moment she saw him. The pharaoh, his crown of vipers hissing, his chest a gaping wound that bled sand. His eyes, burning like the keeper's, fixed on her, and his voice was a blade. You took what is mine. Evelyn gasped, dropping to her knees, the heart slipping from her grasp, landing inches from the box. The tomb's rumble stopped, the silence worse. Heavy with expectation, she crawled forward, her fingers brushing the heart, its warmth spreading through her like poison. The hieroglyphs on the walls glowed faintly, their scenes shifting. Ankit's lover, her dagger raised, his heart torn free, a vow that sealed his soul. Evelyn's mind reeled, piecing together the warning Lila had translated. The heart binds the wrath. Steal it, and the sands drink blood. She'd stolen more than a relic. She'd unleashed a vengeance that knew no rest. The keeper's form flickered at the edge of her vision, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes unblinking. It didn't move, didn't speak, but its presence was a weight, a promise of consequences. Evelyn grabbed the heart, forcing it into the box, her hands shaking as she slammed the lid shut. The tomb exhaled, a rush of air that snuffed her lantern, plunging her into darkness. The heart's pulse faded, but not her own, and she felt the pharaoh's gaze, not gone, but waiting. Blind, Evelyn fumbled for her matches, her breath ragged. The strike of flame revealed the chamber unchanged, the obsidian box sealed. The hieroglyphs dull, but the air was different, lighter, as if the tomb had relented. She stumbled to her feet, clutching her satchel, now empty of the heart's weight. The keeper was gone, or so she told herself, but the shadows felt alive, watching. She retraced her steps through the tomb's corridors, the walls no longer humming, the air no longer thick with decay. The entrance loomed, the stone doors still ajar, and beyond it, the desert was quiet, the red moon softened to silver. Evelyn emerged, expecting chaos. Her team screams, the sand's blood, but the camp was still. The dunes smooth, no trace of the spirals or eyes. The fire burned low, its embers casting a faint glow on the tents, untouched, as if the night's horrors had been a dream. The team was there, huddled by the fire, their faces pale but alive. Thomas gripped his shovel, his leg bandaged, the sand's grip a memory. Lila clutched her notebook, its pages crumpled, her eyes wide with relief. Marcus held his camera, his photographs tucked away, his gaze distant. Kareem stood apart, his knife sheathed, his expression unreadable. They stared at Evelyn, their silence heavy with questions. "It's done," she said, her voice hoarse. "The heart's back." Lila nodded, tears streaking her face, but Thomas's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "Done? You think that fixes it? You saw what it did." Marcus's voice was a whisper. "It's still out there." Evelyn followed his gaze to the dunes, where the sand was smooth but not empty, a faint shape, tall and fraying, its eyes glinting before it dissolved. The keeper, or Ankit, or both, watching, waiting. Evelyn sat by the fire, her hands trembling, the heart's absence a void she couldn't fill. Lila opened her notebook, reading softly, her voice steady now. "The keeper guards the heart, his eyes the desert's wrath. Return it, and the sands may spare you." She paused, her finger tracing a new glyph, one she hadn't seen before, a heart pierced by a blade, surrounded by vipers. "It's not over," she said. "The curse isn't broken, it's paused." Ankit's vow wasn't just to protect the heart, it was to punish. Evelyn's stomach twisted, the pharaoh's dream voice echoing. "You took what is mine." She'd return the heart. But the tomb had tasted her fear, her ambition, and it remembered. The desert was quiet, but its silence was a lie, and the keeper's eyes were everywhere. The team packed at dawn, their movements sluggish, their eyes on the dunes. Evelyn led them, her clipboard forgotten, her mind on the tomb. The heart was back, but its pulse lingered in her veins, a reminder of what she'd woken. The keeper hadn't attacked, hadn't claimed them, but its presence was a shadow she couldn't shake. As they loaded the crates, Marcus showed her one last photograph. Taken at sunrise, a silhouette, not in the dunes but in the camp, standing by her tent, its form fraying into vipers and sand. "It knows you," he said, and Evelyn nodded. The truth a weight she'd carry beyond the desert. The pharaoh's curse wasn't bound to the heart alone. It was bound to her, and the sands would never forget. Chapter 3. The Keeper's Gaze. The desert stretched endless, its sands a canvas of deceit that hid the scars of the night before. Dr. Evelyn Carver led her diminished team away from the camp, their footsteps heavy under the weight of crates and fear. The tomb loomed behind them, its stone door sealed once more. The mummified heart returned to its obsidian prison. Yet the air felt wrong, charged with a stillness that prickled Evelyn's skin. The sun, barely risen, cast long shadows that seemed to linger too long, curling like fingers toward the dunes. Thomas trudged beside her, his bandaged leg slowing his pace, his shovel slung over his shoulder like a soldier's rifle. Lila clutched her notebook, its pages worn from frantic scribbling, her eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the keeper. Marcus walked alone, his camera strapped tight, his photographs hidden but not forgotten. Kareem, the last laborer, trailed behind, his knife sheathed but his hand never far from it. The heart was gone from Evelyn's satchel, but its pulse lingered in her veins, a faint rhythm that whispered of unfinished debts. They'd agreed to leave the Valley of the Kings, to return to Cairo and report the tomb's discovery. Minus the heart, minus the truth. Evelyn's ambition, once a fire, was ash now, replaced by a need to escape the desert's gaze. But the sands had other plans. As they crested a dune, a wind rose, sharp and sudden, sculpting the sand into spirals, eyes. Hearts that pulsed like the one she'd held. Lila gasped, her notebook falling, its pages flapping to reveal sketches of the keeper. Tall, fraying, its ember-like eyes unblinking. "It's still here," she whispered, and Evelyn's stomach twisted. She'd returned the heart, but the Pharaoh's curse, Ankit's curse, wasn't bound to the relic alone. It was bound to her, to the sin of her theft, and the keeper was its enforcer. Marcus's voice was low, almost lost in the wind. "It's watching." He pointed to a photograph, freshly developed, showing a silhouette at the camp's edge, its form dissolving into vipers and sand. Evelyn's dream from the night before haunted her, a vision of Ankit, his crown of vipers hissing, his chest bleeding sand, his voice a hiss. "You took what is mine." But it wasn't the Pharaoh who filled her with dread. It was the keeper, that fraying figure whose eyes burned through her sleep. In the dream, it had spoken, its voice a dry rasp. "The heart is returned, but the debt remains. You are marked." She'd woken gasping, her tent flap open, the sand inside sculpted into a single eye that stared until dawn. Now, as the team moved, she felt that gaze again, not from the dunes but from within, a pressure behind her eyes that made her vision blur. The keeper wasn't just a guardian, it was a judge, and she was on trial. The desert was its courtroom, and every step forward was a step deeper into its verdict. The wind grew fiercer, forcing the team to huddle behind a crate as sand stung their faces. Thomas cursed, his bandage dark with fresh blood, his eyes wild. "This isn't natural," he shouted, gesturing at the dunes where the sand was rising, not falling, forming shapes that defied the storm. Glyphs from the tomb, warnings of wrath and blood. Lila's notebook was useless now, its pages torn, but she recited from memory, her voice trembling. "The keeper's gaze sees all. None escape its judgment." Evelyn snapped at her to stop, but the words were a mirror to her fear. The heart was back, the tomb sealed, yet the curse hadn't lifted. Ankit's vow, Lila had said, was to punish, not just protect, and Evelyn's theft had made her its target. Kareem's gaze was steady, his hand on his knife. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, cutting. "You brought this, Carver. You fix it." Before Evelyn could respond, Marcus screamed, his camera falling as he pointed to the sky. The sandstorm had thickened, but through its haze, a shape emerged. Not a cloud, but a figure, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes piercing the dust. The keeper, no longer content to watch, was here, its form shifting with the storm, now vipers, now claws, now a void that swallowed light. The team scattered, Thomas dragging Lila behind a crate, Kareem drawing his knife, Marcus frozen, his hands clawing at his face. Evelyn stood alone, the heart's phantom pulse roaring in her chest, the keeper's gaze a weight that pinned her. Its voice was in her mind, not a whisper, but a roar. "The debt remains. You are marked." The sand at her feet churned, forming a heart pierced by a blade, and from its center, blood seeped, dark and warm, pooling around her boots. She ran, not toward the team, but the tomb, the only place that made sense. The storm chased her, the keeper's form flickering at her side, its eyes never leaving her. The stone door was ajar, as if waiting, and she stumbled inside, the wind dying at the threshold. The tomb was silent, its air cold, the hieroglyphs glowing faintly. Ankit's betrayal, his lover's dagger, his heart torn free. Evelyn's lantern was gone, but she didn't need it. The walls seemed to light themselves, guiding her to the chamber where the obsidian box sat. It was sealed untouched, but the heart's pulse was alive in her, louder now, a drum that shook her bones. The keeper stood at the chamber's edge, its form fraying into the shadows, its voice a hiss. "You cannot undo what you began." Evelyn's hands trembled as she touched the box, its surface warm, and she knew the truth. Returning the heart hadn't ended the curse. It had only begun her punishment. The tomb's chamber was a vault of shadows, its air so thick with the scent of dust and decay that Dr. Evelyn Carver could barely breathe. The obsidian box sat before her, its surface warm under her trembling fingers, the hieroglyphs carved into it seeming to pulse with a life of their own, scenes of Ankit's betrayal, his lover's dagger, a heart torn free to bind his wrath. The keeper stood at the chamber's edge, its tall, fraying form half dissolved into the darkness, its ember-like eyes burning through her. Its voice was a rasp in her mind, sharp as a blade. You cannot undo what you began. The phantom pulse of the mummified heart, though returned to its prison, thundered in Evelyn's chest, a rhythm that felt like her own, but wasn't. The tomb's walls glowed faintly, their carvings shifting, vipers coiling, eyes watching, blood seeping from stone. She was alone, her team abandoned in the sandstorm outside, and the desert's wrath had followed her here, into the heart of Ankit's curse. Evelyn's hands lingered on the obsidian box, its warmth spreading through her like a fever. She'd returned the heart, slammed the lid shut, but the curse hadn't relented. The keeper's words echoed Lila's translations. The keeper's gaze sees all. None escape its judgment. She'd thought returning the relic would free her, but the pharaoh's vow was deeper, crueler, a punishment for those who dared to steal his soul. Her dream flashed through her mind. Ankit, his crown of vipers hissing, his chest bleeding sand, accusing her. And the keeper, its dry rasp, "You are marked." The tomb shook, a low rumble that sent dust cascading, and Evelyn stumbled back, her eyes darting to the shadows where the keeper moved, its form fraying into claws, then vipers, then nothing, only to reform closer. Its eyes brighter, hungrier. She wanted to scream, to run, but the tomb was a trap, and she was its prey. The hieroglyphs glowed brighter, their scenes unfolding like a vision. Ankit's lover, her face obscured, plunging a dagger into his chest. His priests, chanting as they bound his heart to a curse. The keeper, born of sand and wrath, tasked with guarding it forever. Evelyn's mind reeled, piecing together the truth. The heart wasn't just a relic. It was Ankit's anchor, tying his soul to the earth, his rage to those who disturbed it. She'd taken it, woken him, and now she was part of his vengeance. The keeper's voice hissed again, "The debt is yours. Pay it or perish." The chamber's floor shifted, sand pooling at its center, forming a heart pierced by a blade, blood seeping from its edges, dark and warm. Evelyn's boots stuck in a mire, and she felt it, a pull, not from the box but from the sand, as if the desert itself wanted to claim her. She tore herself free, staggering to the chamber's wall, her hands scraping against the carvings. They were hot, almost alive, and when she touched them, her vision blurred, replaced by Ankit's final moments, his lover's betrayal, her dagger cold, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper stood over him, not a creature but a man then, his eyes human, grieving, bound to serve. Evelyn gasped, pulling back, her hands stained with something dark, something that wasn't sand. The keeper was closer now, its form fraying into the air she breathed, its eyes inches from hers. "You see," it rasped. "You know." She didn't know. The curse wasn't just Ankit's. It was the keeper's too, a shared eternity of guarding, punishing, never resting. And she made herself their target. The tomb shook again, harder, cracks splitting the ceiling, stone dust choking her. Evelyn ran, not toward the entrance, but deeper, the corridors twisting, the hieroglyphs guiding her to a chamber she hadn't seen before. It was vast, its walls lined with jars, their lids carved with vipers, their contents humming faintly. At the center stood a statue of Ankit, his chest hollow, his eyes glowing with the same ember-like fire as the keeper's. The sand here was smooth, unmarked, but it moved, forming spirals, eyes, hearts that pulsed in time with a phantom beat in her chest. Evelyn's satchel was empty, but she felt the heart's weight, its warmth, as if it had never left her. The keeper appeared, not behind her, but everywhere, its form fraying into the walls, the sand, the air. "Pay the debt," it said, and the statue's eyes flared, its hollow chest bleeding sand that pooled at her feet. Evelyn's scream was lost in the rumble as the chamber collapsed inward, sand pouring from the walls, the jars cracking, their contents, dust, bones, something alive, spilling out. She scrambled back, her hands clawing at the sand, finding something hard, cold, a dagger, its blade etched with vipers, its handle warm as if it had just been held. The keeper's voice was a roar now. "Choose." The sand rose, forming Ankit's face, his vipers hissing, his mouth open in a silent scream. Evelyn clutched the dagger, its weight familiar, as if she'd held it before, as if she'd been the one to betray him. The statue cracked, its chest splitting, and from it poured blood, not sand, warm and sticky, flooding the chamber. She ran, the dagger in her hand, the keeper's eyes burning through her, the tomb's collapse chasing her like a beast. She burst into the storm outside, the desert a maelstrom of sand and wrath. The team was there, huddled by a crate, their faces gray with fear. Thomas's shovel was bent, his bandage soaked red. Lila's notebook was gone, her hands empty, her eyes fixed on Evelyn. Marcus's camera was shattered, his photographs buried. Kareem's knife was drawn, his gaze steady, accusing. "What did you do?" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. Evelyn held the dagger, its blade glinting, and the team stepped back, their fear no longer of the desert but of her. The keeper's form flickered in the storm, its eyes everywhere, its voice a whisper. "You are marked." The sand at her feet formed a heart, blood seeping, and Evelyn knew the truth. The curse wasn't in the tomb, it was in her, and the keeper would never let her go. The sandstorm raged, a howling beast that tore at Dr. Evelyn Carver's skin as she stood before her team, the ancient dagger clutched in her hand, its viper-etched blade glinting in the dim light of a lantern that flickered against the desert's wrath. The air was thick with grit and the iron tang of blood. The sand at her feet sculpted into a heart that bled, dark and warm, pooling around her boots. Thomas, Lila, Marcus, and Kareem stared at her, their faces pale, their eyes wide with a fear that wasn't just for the storm or the keeper, but for her. The tomb's collapse still echoed in her ears, the vision of Ankit's statue, its hollow chest bleeding, its viper-crowned head accusing, burned in her mind. The keeper's voice was a constant now, not a whisper, but a pulse in her skull. "You are marked." The dagger felt alive, its handle warm, as if it remembered the Pharaoh's betrayal, as if it knew her sin. The heart's phantom beat thundered in her chest, tying her to Ankit, to the curse, to the desert that refused to let her go. Thomas broke the silence, his voice raw, his shovel raised like a shield. "What the hell is that, Carver? You go into the tomb, and now you're waving a knife like some madwoman?" His bandage was black with blood, his leg trembling under his weight. Lila stepped forward, her hands empty, her notebook lost to the storm, her eyes searching Evelyn's face for answers. "It's from the tomb, isn't it?" she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The dagger, the one from the hieroglyphs, the lover's blade." Marcus, his camera gone, his photographs buried, shook his head, muttering, "It's her." The keeper's after her. Kareem's knife was still drawn, his stance steady, his gaze cold. "You didn't end it," he said. "You made it worse." The sandstorm tightened, the keeper's form flickering in the haze, tall, fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on Evelyn, its presence a weight that crushed her breath. Evelyn's grip on the dagger tightened, its warmth spreading through her, a poison that felt like truth. She wanted to explain, the chamber, the statue, the blood, but the words stuck, drowned by the keeper's hiss, "Pay the debt." The hieroglyphs she'd seen in the tomb were alive in her mind. Ankit's lover, her dagger plunging, his heart torn free to bind his soul. The keeper, once a man, bound to serve, his eyes human before they burned. She'd taken the heart, woken the curse, and now the dagger was her burden, a relic of betrayal that marked her as its own. The sand at her feet churned, the bleeding heart reshaping into a viper, its coils tightening around her ankles, its hiss echoing Ankit's name. Ankit, Ankit. The team flinched. Thomas swinging his shovel at the sand, Lila stumbling back, Marcus covering his ears. Kareem alone stood firm, his knife pointed at Evelyn, his voice steady. "Drop it, or I will." The storm roared. The keeper's form solidifying, no longer a shadow, but a presence that bent the air. Its cloak frayed into vipers, its claws scraped the sand, its eyes burned through Evelyn's soul. She raised the dagger, not at Kareem but at the keeper, a futile gesture that made it laugh. A dry, rasping sound that shook the dunes. "You cannot fight what you owe," it said, and the sand rose, forming a wall that cut her off from the team. Evelyn was alone, the dagger her only companion, its blade glowing faintly, as if it drank the storm's light. The keeper stepped closer, its form fraying into her breath, its voice ablaze. The heart was returned, but the vow remains. You stole his soul, and now you bear its weight. The sand wall pulsed, blood seeping from its core. And Evelyn saw Ankit's face, his viper crown hissing, his chest a wound that bled her name. She swung the dagger, its blade slicing through the keeper's form, but it dissolved, reforming behind her. Its eyes brighter, hungrier. The sand wall collapsed, revealing the team, but they were changed. Thomas's shovel was gone, his hands clawing at his throat, blood trickling from his eyes. Lila's face was gray, her lips moving in a chant she didn't know. Marcus was on his knees, his fingers digging into the sand, pulling up bones that weren't there before. Kareem stood, his knife dropped, his eyes empty, staring at something beyond the storm. The keeper's voice was everywhere. "They pay for you." Evelyn screamed, lunging at the figure, but the sand rose, swallowing her blade, her hand, her arm, pulling her down. The dagger burned, its warmth of fire now, and she saw it. Ankit's lover, her face no longer obscured, her eyes her own. The vision broke, and Evelyn was back, the sand releasing her, the dagger still in her hand, the keeper gone. The storm died, the desert falling silent, the dunes smooth but treacherous. The team was alive, gasping, their wounds real but shallow. Thomas's eyes clear, Lila's chant silent, Marcus's hands empty, Kareem's gaze sharp again. They stared at Evelyn, the dagger a beacon of their fear. Lila's voice was a whisper. "It's the lover's blade, the one that killed him. It's part of the curse." Evelyn nodded, the truth a weight she couldn't shed. The keeper hadn't killed them, but it had marked them, tying their fates to hers. The hieroglyphs had shown the keeper's role, not just guardian but executioner, bound to punish those who broke Ankit's vow. She'd return the heart, but the dagger was proof. The curse wasn't in the relic alone. It was in her, in the choices she'd made, in the desert that remembered. Evelyn sheathed the dagger in her belt, its warmth a constant reminder. "We leave now," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Cairo, we report the tomb, nothing else." Thomas laughed, a broken sound, but he nodded, his shovel forgotten. Lila clutched her arm, her eyes pleading, but she followed. Marcus retrieved a single photograph, the keeper's silhouette burned into it, and tucked it away. Kareem picked up his knife, his gaze never leaving Evelyn, but he said nothing. The desert was quiet, but its silence was a lie, and the keeper's eyes were everywhere, watching, waiting. As they moved, the sand shifted, forming a single eye that stared until they crested the dune, and Evelyn knew. The curse wasn't over. It was hers, and the keeper would follow. The desert was a traitor, its smooth dunes hiding the blood and terror of the night, as Dr. Evelyn Carver led her fractured team toward escape. The sun climbed higher, its heat a hammer that drove sweat into their eyes. But the chill of the keeper's gaze lingered, a shadow no light could banish. Evelyn's hand rested on the dagger at her belt, its viper-etched blade a burning weight against her hip. A relic of Ankit's betrayal that now marked her as its own. Thomas limped beside her, his bandage dark, his shovel abandoned, his curses replaced by a silence that cut deeper. Lila walked close, her notebook gone, her eyes darting to the sands as if expecting them to bleed again. Marcus clutched a single photograph, the keeper's fraying silhouette burned into it. His camera a useless weight on his shoulder. Kareem trailed behind, his knife sheathed but his hand ready, his gaze fixed on Evelyn with a mix of accusation and dread. The phantom pulse of the mummified heart, though returned to the tomb, thrummed in her chest, tying her to Ankit's curse, to the desert that refused to forget. They moved toward the Nile, where a boat waited to carry them to Cairo, but every step felt like defiance against a force that owned them. The dunes were smooth, the storm's spirals and eyes erased. But Evelyn felt the keeper's presence, a pressure behind her eyes, a whisper in the wind. You are marked. The dagger was proof, its warmth a reminder of the vision she'd seen. Ankit's lover. Her face her own, plunging the blade into his chest. The curse wasn't just the heart. It was the betrayal, the vow, the keeper's eternal task to punish. Lila's words from the storm echoed. The lover's blade. It's part of the curse. Evelyn had returned the heart, but the dagger was her burden now, a chain that bound her to Ankit's wrath. The team's silence was heavy. Their trust shattered, and she knew they blamed her, not just for the heart, but for the blood, the sand, the eyes that watched from the dark. A low hum broke the quiet, not from the desert, but from the crates they carried, tools, artifacts, fragments of the tomb they'd meant to catalog. Thomas stopped, his face gray, his hands shaking as he pried open a crate. Inside, nestled among picks and brushes, was an amulet, its surface etched with vipers, its center a single glowing eye. This wasn't here, he said, his voice cracking. We didn't pack this. Lila's breath hitched, her fingers tracing the air as if reading invisible glyphs. It's his, she whispered. Ankit's. The keeper brought it. Marcus's photograph slipped from his hand. The keeper's silhouette clearer now, its eyes matching the amulet's glow. Kareem's knife was out, his stance rigid, his voice low. You brought this, Carver. Everything we touch is cursed. Evelyn's hand tightened on the dagger, its warmth flaring, and the amulet's eye pulsed, sinking with a phantom beat in her chest. The desert answered, the sand shifting to form a circle around them, its edges sharp, unnatural. Blood seeped from its center, dark and warm, pooling into a heart pierced by a blade. The team froze, their eyes on Evelyn, their fear a blade at her throat. Thomas threw the amulet into the sand, but it didn't sink. It floated, its eye glowing brighter, the keeper's form flickering above it, tall and fraying, its claws scraping the air. You cannot leave, it rasped, its voice a chorus of vipers and sand. The debt is yours, Lila screamed, falling to her knees, her hands clawing at the sand, pulling up shards of bone that weren't there before. Marcus backed away, his photograph crumpling under his boot. The keeper's eyes burned into it. Kareem lunged at Evelyn, his knife raised. But the sand rose, swallowing his blade, his hand pulling him down. Thomas grabbed him, dragging him free, but Kareem's arm was marked. Vipers etched into his skin, bleeding alive. Evelyn swung the dagger at the keeper, its blade glowing, slicing through its form, but it dissolved, reforming closer, its eyes inches from hers. You are the dead, it said, and the sand circle tightened, blood flooding its edges, the amulet's eye blazing. She saw Ankit's face in the sand, his viper crown hissing, his chest a wound that bled her name. The team's screams faded, drowned by the keeper's voice, and Evelyn felt the dagger's warmth spread, her vision blurring. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands red with his blood. The vision broke, and she was back, the sand still, the keeper gone, the amulet buried, the circle erased. But the team was broken. Thomas's hands bled, Lila's eyes were empty. Marcus's photograph was ash, Kareem's arm bore vipers that moved under his skin. They turned on her, their voices a cacophony of blame. Thomas's fist clenched, his voice raw. "You did this, Carver. You and that damn knife." Lila's whisper was worse, a plea. "Give it back. The dagger. It's his." Marcus shook his head, his voice a ghost. "It won't stop. It's in us now." Kareem's gaze was cold, his marked arm trembling, his words a verdict. "You're the curse." Evelyn's hand tightened on the dagger, its warmth a fire that felt like truth. She wanted to drop it, to run, but the keeper's eyes were everywhere, in the sand, the sky, her mind. The curse wasn't the heart or the dagger. It was her ambition, her theft. The desert knew, and it would never let her go. Evelyn raised the dagger, not to fight, but to speak. "We go to Cairo," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "We end this together." Thomas laughed, a broken sound, but he nodded, his hands shaking. Lila clutched her arm, her eyes pleading, but she followed. Marcus retrieved the amulet, its eye dull now, and tucked it away. Kareem sheathed his knife, his viper-marked arm hidden, but his gaze never left Evelyn. The desert was quiet, but its silence was a trap, and the keeper's gaze was eternal. As they moved, the sand shifted, forming a single viper that slithered until they crested the dune, and Evelyn knew. The curse was hers, and the team was her punishment. Chapter 4. Blood on the Dunes. The desert was a liar, its dunes smooth and golden under a midday sun that offered no mercy. Dr. Evelyn Carver trudged forward, the viper-etched dagger at her belt a burning weight, its warmth a constant reminder of the curse that bound her. The Nile was close, its promise of escape a faint shimmer on the horizon. But every step felt like a betrayal of the desert's will. Her team, now a ragged shadow of itself, followed in silence, their trust eroded by blood and fear. Thomas limped, his bandage soaked, his eyes hollow with pain and doubt. Lila clung to a scrap of paper, her notebook's last page, her lips moving in silent recitation of glyphs she couldn't unsee. Marcus carried the amulet, its viper eye dull but heavy in his pocket, his camera abandoned. Kareem's arm bore the keeper's mark, vipers etched into his skin, moving faintly, bleeding when he thought no one watched. The phantom pulse of the mummified heart thrummed in Evelyn's chest, though it lay sealed in the tomb, tying her to Ankit's wrath, to the keeper's unyielding gaze. The sand was too quiet, its stillness a trap. Evelyn's mind churned with the tomb's visions. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger into his chest. The keeper, once a man, bound to serve a pharaoh's curse. The hieroglyphs had told the story, a heart torn free, a vow to punish, a desert that drank blood. She'd return the heart, but the dagger was her sin now, its blade a key to Ankit's vengeance. The keeper's last words, "You are the debt," were a chain, and the team's suffering was her punishment. Thomas's cough broke her thoughts, a wet, ragged sound that made Lila flinch. "We're not going to make it," he rasped, his hand clutching his side, blood seeping through his shirt. Evelyn's stomach twisted. His wound wasn't from the sand's grip. It was new, unnatural, a mark of the curse's reach. Before she could respond, the sand shifted, a low rumble spreading beneath their feet. The dunes parted, revealing a sunken circle, its edges carved with glyphs, spirals. Eyes, hearts that pulsed like the one she'd stolen. At its center lay stones, arranged in a pattern too deliberate, too old. Blood seeped from the sand, dark and warm, pooling into a viper's shape that hissed Ankit's name. Ankit, Ankit. The team froze, their breath shallow, their eyes on Evelyn. Marcus's hand shook as he pulled the amulet from his pocket, its eye glowing faintly, syncing with the circle's pulse. Lila's voice was a whisper. It's a ritual sight, like the tomb's warnings, blood to bind, blood to free. Kareem's marked arm bled, vipers writhing under his skin, and he stepped back, his knife drawn, his gaze accusing. "You let us here," he said, his voice steady, deadly. Evelyn's hand went to the dagger, its warmth flaring, a fire that felt like truth. She wanted to deny it, to blame the desert, but the glyphs were the same as the tombs, warnings of a pharaoh's wrath, a lover's betrayal, a keeper's judgment. The circle was no accident. It was a stage, and she was its player. The keeper's form flickered at the circle's edge, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her. Its voice was a rasp in her mind. The debt demands blood. The sand rose, forming a wall that cut her off from the team, their shouts muffled, their shapes blurred. Evelyn stood alone, the dagger in her hand, the viper's blood pooling at her feet. The amulet in Marcus's hand glowed brighter, its eye a beacon, and she saw it. Ankit's face in the sand, his viper crown hissing, his chest a wound that bled her guilt. She swung the dagger at the keeper, its blade slicing through air, but it dissolved, reforming closer, its claws scraping her arm, drawing blood that mixed with the sands. The pain was sharp, grounding, and Evelyn's vision blurred. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands red with his blood, her voice pleading for forgiveness. The vision broke, and she was back, the sand wall gone, the team staring, their faces gray with horror. Thomas was on his knees, blood dripping from his mouth, his eyes wide with something beyond pain. Lila's scrap of paper was ash, her hands burned, her lips still moving in a chant she didn't know. Marcus's amulet was in the sand, its eye blazing. The keeper's form rising from it, taller, sharper, its vipers coiling around his legs. Kareem's knife was gone, his marked arm bleeding freely, vipers slithering toward the circle's center. Evelyn ran to Thomas, her hands shaking as she pressed his wound. But the blood was wrong. Thick, black, smelling of decay. "It's in me," he gasped, his eyes rolling back, his body convulsing. Lila's chant grew louder, a language Evelyn didn't know, and the sand responded, forming a heart that pulsed with Thomas's blood. The keeper's voice was a roar. "Pay the debt." Evelyn's dagger burned, its blade glowing, and she knew. The ritual site demanded blood, not just Ankit's but hers, the team's, the desert's. She pulled Thomas back, but the sand clung, pulling him down, his screams fading as the viper's blood swallowed him. The circle pulsed, the glyphs glowing, and Evelyn felt the dagger's truth. The curse wasn't bound to the heart or the tomb. It was bound to her. And the desert would drink until it was sated. The desert was a predator, its dunes clawing at the sky as the ritual site pulsed with a hunger that Dr. Evelyn Carver could feel in her bones. The sand's circle glowed, its glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts, burning with an unnatural light. The blood-soaked viper at its center hissing Ankit's name. Ankit, Ankit. Thomas was gone, swallowed by the sand. His final scream, a fading echo in the air thick with decay and iron. Evelyn stood frozen, the viper-etched dagger in her hand, its blade glowing faintly, its warmth a fire that seared her palm. The keeper loomed at the circle's edge, its tall, fraying form shifting. Vipers one moment, claws the next, its ember-like eyes fixed on her. Its voice was a blade in her mind. Pay the debt. The team, Lila, Marcus, and Kareem, stood at the circle's rim, their faces gray, their bodies marked by the curse. Lila's hands were burned, her lips moving in a chant she didn't understand. Marcus clutched the amulet, its glowing, eyes sinking with the circle's pulse. Kareem's viper-marked arm bled, the etchings slithering toward his heart. Evelyn's vision blurred, the dagger's warmth pulling her into Ankit's past. His lover, her face her own, plunging the blade into his chest, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper stood over him, a man then, his eyes human, grieving, bound to serve. The vision shattered, and Evelyn was back, the sand circle tightening, blood pooling higher, the glyphs pulsing faster. Lila's chant grew louder, a guttural tongue that made the air shiver, and the sand responded, forming a heart that beat with Thomas's stolen life. Marcus dropped the amulet, its eye blazing, and the keeper's form solidified, its claws scraping the sand, its voice a roar. The debt is blood. Kareem lunged at Evelyn, his marked arm outstretched, his eyes empty, as if the curse had claimed his will. She dodged, the dagger slashing air, but the sand rose, tripping her, its grip cold and alive. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, the dagger's glow her only light as the sun dimmed, swallowed by a haze that wasn't natural. The ritual site was alive, its glyphs shifting, Ankit's betrayal, his heart torn free, his vow to punish. Lila's chant faltered, her eyes wide with horror as she saw it. A figure rising from the circle's center. Not the keeper, but Ankit, his viper crown hissing. His chest a gaping wound that bled sand and blood. His eyes, burning like the keeper's, fixed on Evelyn, and his voice was a hiss. "You took what is mine." The sand surged, vipers coiling around Marcus's legs, pulling him toward the circle. He screamed, clawing at the sand, but it was relentless, his body sinking, the amulet's eye glowing brighter as it sank with him. Kareem's marked arm bled faster, vipers slithering up his chest, and he fell, his breath ragged, his knife useless against the curse. Evelyn ran to Lila, grabbing her burned hands, shouting over the wind, "Tell me how to stop it." Lila's eyes were wild, her voice a whisper. The glyphs, they say blood binds, blood frees. The heart was the key, but the dagger is the price. The sand circle pulsed, Ankit's form growing clearer, his vipers lunging, their fangs grazing Evelyn's arm, drawing blood that mixed with the desert's. The keeper's voice was everywhere. Or perish. Evelyn's mind raced, the hieroglyphs truth clear now. The heart had woken Ankit, but the dagger was the curse's anchor, its blade tied to the lover's betrayal. To end it, she had to return it, not to the tomb, but to the ritual site, to the sand that drank blood. She clutched the dagger, its glow blinding, and ran toward the circle's center, where Ankit's form towered, his wound bleeding her name. The sand fought her, vipers coiling around her ankles, but the dagger's warmth gave her strength, its blade slicing through the curse's grip. She reached the heart-shaped pool, its blood warm, sticky, pulsing with Ankit's rage. The keeper appeared, its form fraying into her breath, its eyes inches from hers. "Choose," it rasped, and Evelyn saw the truth. The curse demanded blood, not just Ankit's, but hers, the team's, the desert's. She raised the dagger, not to strike, but to offer, plunging it into the sand's heart, its blade sinking deep, blood welling around it. The circle shook, the glyphs flaring, Ankit's form screaming, his vipers dissolving into sand. The keeper's eyes dimmed, its form fraying into nothing, and the sand stilled, the blood drying, the circle collapsing into smooth dunes. Evelyn fell to her knees, the dagger gone, its warmth fading from her palm. The team was there, alive but broken, Lila's hands trembling, her chant silent, Marcus gasping, free of the sand's grip, Kareem's marked arm still, its vipers frozen. They stared at her, their eyes empty of trust, heavy with blame. The amulet lay in the sand, its eye dull, its power spent. Lila's voice was a ghost. "It's not over." The glyph said the debt is never paid. Evelyn nodded, the phantom pulse in her chest fainter but not gone, a reminder of Ankit's vow. The desert was quiet, but its silence was a lie, and the keeper's gaze lingered, a shadow in her mind. As they moved toward the Nile, the sand shifted, forming a single viper that watched until they crested the dune, and Evelyn knew. The curse was hers, and the desert would wait. The desert exhaled, its dunes settling into a deceptive calm as Dr. Evelyn Carver staggered from the ritual site, her hands empty, the viper-etched dagger now buried in the sand's bleeding heart. The air was heavy with the stench of iron and decay, the sun a dull smear behind a haze that clung to the horizon. The Nile was close, its promise of escape a faint glint, but Evelyn felt no relief. The phantom pulse of the mummified heart thrummed faintly in her chest, a tether to Ankit's curse that refused to break. Her team, Lila, Marcus, and Kareem, followed, their steps sluggish. their faces etched with the cost of survival. Lila's burned hands trembled, her eyes darting to the sand as if expecting it to rise again. Marcus clutched the amulet, its viper-eye dull but heavy, a relic of the curse's grip. Kareem's marked arm was still, the vipers etched into his skin no longer moving, but his gaze was a blade, fixed on Evelyn with unspoken blame. The keeper was gone, its fraying form dissolved, but its ember-like eyes lingered in her mind, its voice a whisper, the debt is never paid. The sand was smooth, the ritual site's glyphs erased, but the desert's silence was a lie. Evelyn's mind churned with the hieroglyph's truth, Ankit's betrayal, his lover's dagger, a vow that bound his soul to punish. She'd returned the heart, buried the dagger, but the curse wasn't bound to relics alone. It was bound to her, to the sin of her ambition. Lila's words echoed. The debt is never paid. The team moved in silence, their trust shattered, their wounds a map of the curse's reach. Lila's burns, Marcus's haunted eyes, Kareem's marked arm. Thomas was gone, swallowed by the sand, his blood feeding the ritual that had spared them, for now. Evelyn's arm stung where the keeper's claws had grazed her, the wound shallow but black, smelling of decay. She hid it under her sleeve, but the pain was a reminder. The desert knew her, and it wasn't done. A low hum broke the quiet, not from the sand, but from the amulet in Marcus's hand. He stopped, his face pale, his fingers trembling as he held it up. The viper eye glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the phantom beat in Evelyn's chest. "It's not over," he whispered, his voice cracking. Lila's eyes widened, her burned hands clutching at the air, as if tracing glyphs only she could see. The ritual, it wasn't enough, she said. The glyph said blood freeze, but only for a time. Ankit's vow is eternal. Kareem's hand went to his knife, his marked arm twitching, the vipers stirring faintly under his skin. "You did this," he said, his voice low, steady. "You buried the dagger, but still calling him." Evelyn's hand reached for her belt, where the dagger had been, and found nothing but the warmth of its memory, a fire that hadn't faded. The sand shifted, a subtle ripple that made the team freeze. It rose, forming a single eye that stared, unblinking, its pupil glowing like the amulet's. The keeper's form flickered at the dune's crest, tall and fraying, its claws scraping the air, its eyes burning through Evelyn. Its voice was a hiss. "You cannot flee what you owe." The sand eye pulsed, blood seeping from its edges. And Evelyn's wound flared, black and hot, spreading up her arm. She stumbled, her vision blurring. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands red with his blood. Her voice pleading for mercy that never came. The vision broke, and the keeper was closer, its form fraying into vipers that coiled around her legs, their fangs grazing her skin, drawing blood that mixed with the sands. The team shouted, their voices distant, as if the desert had swallowed sound. Evelyn swung her fist, no dagger to wield, and the keeper dissolved, its vipers sinking into the sand, its eyes reforming in the eye-shaped glyph. Lila grabbed her arm, her burned hand surprisingly strong, her voice urgent. "It's testing you." The dagger was a step, but the curse wants more. Marcus dropped the amulet, its eye blazing, and the sand surged, pulling him down, his screams muffled as vipers coiled around his chest. Kareem lunged, his knife slashing at the sand, but it was relentless, blood welling where his blade struck. Evelyn ran to Marcus, her wounded arm throbbing, and pulled, her strength fading as the sand fought back. Lila chanted, a desperate plea in a tongue she shouldn't know, and the sand loosened, spitting Marcus out, his body marked with viper bites, bleeding, alive but broken. The keeper reappeared, its form sharper, its claws longer, its voice a roar, blood for blood. Evelyn's wound burned, black tendrils snaking up her shoulder, and she felt Ankit's presence, not in the sand but in her, his rage a heat that wasn't hers. The amulet's eye pulsed faster, the sand eye mirroring it, and Evelyn knew. The ritual site had been a trap, a stage for the curse's next act. The dagger had bought them time, but the keeper demanded more, a price she couldn't name. She grabbed the amulet, its eye searing her palm, and threw it into the Sand Eye's center, blood welling around it, the desert shaking as if in pain. The keeper screamed, its form fraying into nothing, the Sand Eye collapsing, the dunes smoothing over, silent once more. The team gasped, their wounds bleeding, their eyes on Evelyn. Marcus coughed, viper marks oozing on his chest, his voice a ghost. It's not done. Lila's chant was silent, her burned hands trembling, her gaze pleading. Kareem's marked arm bled, his knife at his side, his words a verdict. You're the dead. Evelyn's wound throbbed, black and alive, a mark of the keeper's claim. The desert was quiet, but its silence was a predator, and the phantom pulse in her chest was a warning. Ankit's vow was eternal, and she was its vessel. As they moved toward the Nile, the sand shifted, forming a single viper that watched until they crested the dune, and Evelyn knew. The keeper was waiting, and the desert would drink again. Chapter 5. The Tomb's Call. The Nile shimmered in the distance, a ribbon of hope cutting through the desert's unrelenting gold. But Dr. Evelyn Carver felt no promise in its gleam. The sun hung low, casting shadows that slithered across the dunes like vipers, each one a reminder of the curse that clung to her. The viper-etched dagger was gone, buried in the ritual site's bleeding heart, but its warmth lingered in her palm, a ghost of Ankit's wrath. Her team, Lila, Marcus, and Kareem, trudged behind, their bodies marked by the desert's cruelty. Lila's burned hands were wrapped in scraps of cloth, her eyes hollow, haunted by the glyphs she'd read. Marcus's chest bore viper bites, oozing black, his breath shallow as he clutched the now-dull amulet. Kareem's arm, etched with vipers, bled faintly, the marks still under his skin, a silent threat. Evelyn's own wound, where the keeper's claws had grazed her, pulsed with black tendrils snaking up her shoulder, each throb a whisper of the phantom heart she'd returned but couldn't escape. The desert was silent, its dunes smooth, but Evelyn felt the keeper's gaze, a pressure behind her eyes that never faded. Its last words, blood for blood, were a verdict, and the ritual site had been a warning. The curse wasn't bound to the heart or the dagger, but to her, to the sin of her theft. Ankit's vow, etched in the tomb's hieroglyphs, was eternal, betrayal punished, blood demanded. The keeper his unending enforcer. The team's silence was heavier than the heat, their trust long buried with Thomas. Kareem's gaze was a blade, Marcus's a plea, Lila's a mirror of her own dread. They moved toward the Nile, toward Cairo, toward a world that felt impossibly distant, but every step was a defiance the desert wouldn't forgive. The phantom pulse in Evelyn's chest quickened, not her heartbeat, but Ankit's, a call she couldn't ignore. The sand shifted, a subtle ripple that made Lila gasp, her wrapped hands clutching at the air. It's calling, she whispered, her voice raw. The tomb, it's not done with us. Evelyn's wound flared, black and hot, and she followed Lila's gaze to a dune where the sand was moving, forming a single eye that glowed like the amulets had. Its pupil fixed on her. Marcus coughed, blood flecking his lips, his viper bites oozing as he dropped the amulet, its eye dull but heavy. It's a me, he said, his voice a ghost. Kareem's marked arm twitched, vipers stirring, and he stepped back, his knife drawn, his eyes on Evelyn. You brought us here, he said, his voice steady, accusing. You buried the dagger, but it's still his. Evelyn's hand reached for her belt, finding only the memory of the dagger's warmth, and the sand eye pulsed, blood seeping from its edges, whispering, Ankit, Ankit. Before she could speak, a shadow moved. Not the keeper, but a man, cloaked, his face obscured, standing at the dune's crest. He held a staff, its tip carved with vipers, and when he raised it, the sand eye dissolved, the desert stilling. The team froze, their wounds bleeding, their eyes on the stranger. Evelyn's wound throbbed, the phantom pulse roaring, and she felt it. A pull, not to the Nile, but back to the tomb. The man's voice was low, accented, carrying the weight of the desert. You cannot run. The keeper sees, and the tomb calls. Lila's breath hitched, her burned hands tracing glyphs in the air. "He's one of them," she said. "The Guardians." Like the keeper was before. Marcus's cough was wet, his eyes wide with fear, but Kareem stepped forward. His knife raised, his marked arm steady. "Who are you?" he demanded, but the man only pointed his staff at Evelyn, his eyes hidden but piercing. The sand shifted again, forming a path that led not to the Nile, but back, toward the Valley of the Kings, toward the tomb. The man spoke, his voice a hiss. The heart was returned, the dagger buried, but the vow remains. "You are marked, thief, and the tomb demands you." Evelyn's wound burned, black tendrils snaking toward her heart, and she saw it. Ankit's face in the sand, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding her guilt. The stranger's staff glowed, its vipers coiling, and the phantom pulse in her chest became a scream, a call she couldn't resist. She took a step, not toward the Nile, but the tomb, her body moving before her mind could protest. Lila grabbed her arm, her burned hands trembling, her voice urgent. "Don't. It's a trap." But the stranger's staff pulsed, and Lila fell, her eyes rolling back, a chant spilling from her lips in a tongue she shouldn't know. Marcus lunged at the stranger, his viper bites bleeding. But the sand rose, swallowing his legs, pulling him down. Kareem's knife slashed at the air, his marked arm bleeding freely, vipers slithering toward his heart. But the stranger was gone, dissolved into the sand, his staff a shadow in the dunes. The path to the tomb glowed, its glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts, burning, and Evelyn felt the keeper's gaze, not from the stranger, but within. Its voice a roar, return or perish. Her wound was alive, black and pulsing, and she knew the tomb wasn't done with her. The heart, the dagger, the ritual site, they were steps, not the end. Ankit's vow demanded more, and she was its vessel. The team's screams faded, the sand path pulling her, and Evelyn walked, the tomb's call a chain she couldn't break. The desert's wrath her only guide. The desert was a labyrinth of light and shadow, its dunes folding into paths that led Dr. Evelyn Carver inexorably back toward the Valley of the Kings. The Nile's shimmer was a fading dream, replaced by the glowing trail of glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts that burned in the sand, guiding her to the tomb. The viper-etched dagger was gone, buried in the ritual site, but its warmth lingered in her veins, a fire tied to Ankit's curse. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had grazed her, pulsed with black tendrils that snaked toward her heart, each throb a summons she couldn't refuse. The phantom pulse of the mummified heart roared in her chest, no longer a relic, but a part of her, binding her to the Pharaoh's wrath. Behind her, Lila, Marcus, and Kareem struggled to follow, their bodies broken by the curse's touch. Lila's burned hands trembling, Marcus's viper bites oozing, Kareem's marked arm bleeding. The stranger's words echoed, "The tomb demands you." Evelyn walked, her steps heavy, the desert's silence a predator waiting to strike. The path glowed brighter, its glyphs shifting, Ankit's betrayal, his lover's dagger, his heart torn free to bind his soul. The keeper's voice was a constant now, not in the air, but in her mind, a hiss that drowned her thoughts. Return or perish. Evelyn's vision blurred, pulling her into Ankit's past, his lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger into his chest, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper stood over him, a man then, his eyes human, bound to serve an eternal vow. The vision shattered, and Evelyn stumbled, the tomb's entrance looming ahead, its stone door ajar, as if it had never been sealed. The air was cold, thick with the scent of dust and decay, and the glyphs on the door pulsed, their scenes alive, vipers coiling, eyes watching, blood seeping from stone. Her team caught up, their breaths ragged, their eyes wide with dread. Lila's voice was a whisper, her burned hands clutching Evelyn's sleeve. "You can't go in. It's a trap. The glyphs, they say the tomb takes what it's owed." Her eyes were wild, her chant from the desert still lingering on her lips, a tongue she shouldn't know. Marcus coughed, blood flecking his lips. His viper bites black and spreading, the amulet in his hand dull but heavy. "It's calling her," he said, his voice a ghost, like it called Thomas. Kareem's marked arm bled, vipers stirring under his skin, his knife drawn but useless. "You walk in there, you don't come out," he said, his gaze cold, accusing. Evelyn's wound flared, black and alive, and she felt the tomb's pull, not just in her body, but her soul, a chain forged by her theft. The keeper's form flickered at the door, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her. Its voice a roar, "You are the dead." She stepped forward, the team's protests fading, drowned by the tomb's hum, a low, rhythmic pulse that matched the phantom heart in her chest. The corridors twisted, their walls glowing with hieroglyphs that told Ankit's story, his love, his betrayal, his curse. The air grew colder, heavier, as Evelyn reached the chamber where the obsidian box sat. Its surface warm, its lid sealed. The mummified heart was inside, returned but not silenced, its pulse a drum that shook her bones. The keeper stood at the chamber's edge, its form fraying in a viper's claws, a void that swallowed light. "The vow is eternal," it rasped. Blood for blood. The sand at her feet shifted, forming a heart pierced by a blade, blood seeping, warm and sticky, pooling around her boots. Evelyn's wound burned, black tendrils reaching her throat, and she saw Ankit's face in the sand, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding her name. The team burst in, their faces pale, their wounds bleeding. Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the walls shake, the glyphs flaring. Marcus dropped the amulet, its viper eye glowing faintly, syncing with the sand's pulse. Kareem's knife slashed at the air, his marked arm bleeding freely, vipers slithering toward his heart. "End it, Carver!" he shouted. But the keeper laughed, a dry, rasping sound that choked the air. Evelyn's hand reached for the obsidian box, its warmth spreading through her, a poison that felt like truth. She pried it open, the heart inside pristine, pulsing alive. The tomb shook, cracks splitting the ceiling, dust cascading, and Ankit's form rose from the sand. Not a vision, but flesh, his viper crown hissing. His wound bleeding sand and blood. His eyes, burning like the keeper's, fixed on her, and his voice was a hiss. "You took what is mine." Evelyn's scream was lost in the rumble as the chamber collapsed inward, sand pouring from the walls, the heart's pulse a scream in her chest. She grabbed the heart, its warmth searing, and ran, the team following, their wounds bleeding, their shouts muffled. The corridors twisted, the glyphs guiding them, not out but deeper, to a chamber she hadn't seen, a vast crypt, its walls lined with jars, their viper lids humming, their contents alive. At its center stood Ankit's statue, its chest hollow, its eyes glowing with the keeper's fire. The sand here was smooth, but it moved, forming spirals, eyes, hearts that pulsed with her blood. The keeper appeared, its form everywhere, its voice a roar. "Pay the debt." Evelyn's wound was a fire, black tendrils choking her, and she felt Ankit's rage. Not in the statue, but in her, his vow her own. The heart in her hands burned, its pulse a call to the tomb, to the desert, to the curse that would never let her go. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Pharaoh. The tomb was a living thing, its crypt a heart that pulsed with the desert's wrath. Dr. Evelyn Carver stood in the vast chamber, the mummified heart burning in her hands, its rhythm a scream that drowned her own. The walls were lined with alabaster jars, their viper-carved lids humming, their contents shifting as if alive. At the center loomed Ankit's statue, its hollow chest bleeding sand, its glowing eyes mirroring the keeper's ember-like gaze. The sand at Evelyn's feet churned, forming spirals, eyes, hearts that pulsed with her blood, each one whispering Ankit's name. Ankit, Ankit. Her team, Lila, Marcus, and Kareem, huddled behind her, their wounds bleeding, their faces gray with dread. Lila's burned hands trembled, her chant silent, but her lips still moving. Marcus's viper bites oozed black, his breath ragged, the amulet lost in the collapse. Kareem's marked arm bled, vipers frozen under his skin, his knife a useless weight. Evelyn's wound, black tendrils snaking toward her heart, was a fire that tied her to the curse, to the tomb, to the Pharaoh's unending vow. The Keeper was everywhere, its tall, fraying form woven into the walls, the sand, the air she breathed. Its voice was a roar, pay the debt. The heart, in Evelyn's hands, burned hotter, its pulse sinking with the statue's glowing eyes, with the jar's hum, with the desert's pulse. She'd returned the heart once, buried the dagger, but the curse was deeper. Etched in Ankit's betrayal, a lover's blade, a heart torn free, a vow to punish forever. Her vision blurred, pulling her into Ankit's past, his lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her. The Keeper, a man then, knelt beside him, his eyes human, bound to serve. The vision broke, and Evelyn gasped, the heart's warmth spreading through her. A poison that felt like truth. The statue's eyes flared, sand pouring from its chest, and Ankit's form rose, not stone but flesh, his viper crown hissing, his wound bleeding her guilt. Lila's scream cut through the chamber, her burned hands clawing at the air as the jars cracked, their viper lids splitting, dust and bones spilling out, something alive slithering within. Marcus fell, his viper bites spreading, black tendrils snaking up his throat, his cough wet with blood. Kareem's knife slashed at the sand, his marked arm bleeding. But the vipers under his skin stirred, coiling toward his heart. "Do something, Carver!" he shouted, his voice breaking. Evelyn's wound was a furnace, black and alive, and she felt Ankit's rage. Not in the statue, but in her, his vow her own. The Keeper's form solidified, its claws scraping the sand, its eyes inches from hers. Blood for blood, it rasped and the sand surged. Vipers coiling around her legs, their fangs grazing her skin, drawing blood that mixed with the desert's. Evelyn swung the heart, not to strike but to defy, its pulse a scream that shook the chamber. The statue cracked, its chest splitting blood, not sand, flooding the floor, warm and sticky, pooling around her boots. Ankit's form stepped forward, his viper crown hissing, his voice a hiss. "You took what is mine." The jars shattered, their contents, bones, dust, vipers, pouring out, slithering toward the team. Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the walls shake. The glyphs flaring, Ankit's betrayal, his heart, his curse. Marcus's scream was raw, his body convulsing as vipers coiled around his chest, their fangs sinking deep. Kareem's knife was useless, his marked arm bleeding freely, vipers slithering up his throat. Evelyn's wound choked her, black tendrils reaching her eyes, and she saw the truth. The curse wasn't the heart or the dagger. It was Ankit's soul, and she was its vessel. She ran, clutching the heart, the team following, their wounds bleeding, their shouts muffled by the tomb's rumble. The corridors twisted, the glyphs guiding them, not out but deeper, to a chamber sealed by a stone door, its surface carved with a single heart pierced by vipers. The Keeper appeared, its form fraying into the door, its voice a hiss, "Pay," or "Perish." Evelyn's wound was a scream, her vision blurring. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands red with his blood, her voice pleading for mercy. The heart in her hands burned, its pulse a call to the door, to the curse, to Ankit. She pushed, the door grinding open, revealing a pit, its walls lined with glyphs. Its floor a pool of blood that pulsed with the heart's rhythm. Ankit stood at its center, his viper crown hissing, his wound bleeding sand and blood, his eyes burning through her. The team stumbled in, their wounds alive, Lila's burns oozing, Marcus's viper bites spreading, Kareem's vipers slithering. The Keeper's form was everywhere, its claws scraping the walls. Its voice a roar, "The debt is yours." Evelyn's wound was her heart now, black and pulsing, and she felt Ankit's rage, his betrayal, his vow. The heart in her hands was a star, its warmth blinding, its pulse a scream that shook the pit. She stepped toward Ankit, the blood pool rising, warm and sticky, pulling her down. Lila's chant was a scream, Marcus's cough a death rattle, Kareem's knife a final slash at nothing. Evelyn raised the heart, not to return it but to challenge. Its pulse her own, her wound Ankit's, her guilt the curses. The pit shook, the glyphs flaring, and Ankit's form lunged, his vipers coiling, his wound bleeding her name. The keeper's eyes everywhere, demanding blood. The pit was a wound in the earth, its blood-filled floor pulsing with the rhythm of the mummified heart in Dr. Evelyn Carver's hands. The air was thick with the stench of iron and decay. The walls lined with glyphs that glowed, spirals, eyes, hearts, each one a testament to Ankit's betrayal and his eternal vow. Evelyn stood at the edge of the blood pool, the heart burning like a coal, its pulse a scream that drowned her own. Ankit loomed before her, his viper crown hissing, his chest a gaping wound that bled sand and blood, his ember-like eyes boring into her soul. The keeper was everywhere, its tall, fraying form woven into the walls, the sand, the blood, its voice a roar. The debt is yours. Her team, Lila, Marcus, and Kareem, clung to the pit's edge, their wounds alive with the curse's touch. Lila's burned hands oozed, her chant a desperate scream. Marcus's viper bites spread, black tendrils choking his throat, his cough a death rattle. Kareem's marked arm bled, vipers slithering up his chest, his knife slashing at shadows that didn't bleed. Evelyn's wound, black tendrils snaking through her heart, was a fire that bound her to Ankit, to the curse, to the tomb's unending call. The heart's pulse was her own now, its warmth a poison that felt like truth. Evelyn's vision blurred, pulling her into Ankit's past, his lover. Her face her own, plunging the viper-etched dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper knelt beside him, a man then, his eyes human, bound to an eternal task. The vision shattered, and Evelyn gasped, the heart's heat spreading through her, her wound a scream that matched Ankit's hiss. You took what is mine. The blood pool rose, warm and sticky, pulling at her boots, vipers coiling from its depths, their fangs grazing her legs, drawing blood that mixed with the deserts. Lila's chant grew louder, a guttural tongue that shook the walls. The glyphs flaring, Ankit's betrayal, his heart torn free, his vow to punish. Marcus fell, his viper bites consuming him, his body sinking into the blood, his scream fading. Kareem's knife was useless, his vipers choking him, his eyes empty as he collapsed, the sand claiming him. Evelyn stepped into the blood pool, the heart raised, not to surrender, but to defy. The keeper's claws scraped her arms, its eyes inches from hers, its voice a hiss, blood for blood. Ankit's form lunged, his vipers coiling around her, their fangs sinking deep, her blood feeding the pool. She screamed, the heart's pulse a star in her hands, its light blinding, its heat her own. The glyphs told the story. Ankit's lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. Evelyn's wound was Ankit's now, her guilt his vow, her life the debt. She saw the keeper's truth, not just a guardian, but a prisoner, bound to Ankit's rage, its human eyes long burned away. The blood pool surged, vipers rising, and Evelyn felt Ankit's soul, not in the heart, but in her, his rage of fire that wasn't hers. Lila's chant was a lifeline, her voice cracking as she shouted. The glyphs, blood binds, blood freeze. Evelyn's mind raced. The heart was the key, the dagger the price, but the curse was Ankit's soul, and she was its vessel. She plunged the heart into the blood pool, its pulse a scream that shook the pit, the glyphs flaring, the walls cracking. Ankit's form roared, his vipers dissolving, his wound bleeding her name. The keeper's form frayed, its eyes dimming, its voice a whisper, The debt is paid. The blood pool stilled, the vipers sinking, the sand smoothing over, but Evelyn's wound burned. Black tendrils choking her heart, her vision darkening. She saw Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands clean, her voice silent. The vision broke, and Evelyn was alone, the heart gone. The blood pool dry, the pit silent. She stumbled to the pit's edge, Lila the only one left, her burned hands trembling, her eyes wide with grief. Marcus and Kareem were gone, their bodies claimed by the sand, their wounds the curse's price. The keeper was absent, its form dissolved, but its gaze lingered, a shadow in Evelyn's mind. The glyphs were dull, their story told. Ankit's betrayal, his curse, his soul bound to the desert. Lila's voice was a ghost. It's not over. The vow is eternal. Evelyn nodded, her wound a faint pulse now. The heart's rhythm fading, but not gone. The tomb was quiet, but its silence was a lie, and the desert remembered. As they climbed from the pit, the sand shifted, forming a single viper that watched until they reached the corridor, and Evelyn knew. The curse was hers, and the tomb would call again. The tomb's corridors were a maze of silence, their walls dim. The glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts, now dull, as if exhausted by the curse's latest demand. Dr. Evelyn Carver stumbled forward, her body heavy with the weight of loss. Her wound a faint pulse of black tendrils that clung to her heart. The mummified heart was gone, dissolved in the blood pool, but its phantom rhythm lingered. A whisper of Ankit's wrath that refused to fade. Lila followed, her burned hands wrapped in tattered cloth, her eyes hollow, her chants silenced by grief. Marcus and Kareem were lost to the pit, their bodies claimed by the sand, their wounds the price of Evelyn's sin. The keeper's absence was a hollow victory, its ember-like eyes still a shadow in her mind, its voice a faint hiss. The debt is paid, but the desert was a liar, and Evelyn knew the truth. Ankit's vow was eternal, and she was its vessel, marked by the tomb's call, bound to a curse that fed on blood. The air was cold, thick with the scent of dust and decay. As they navigated the twisting passages, the tombs hum a low throb that matched Evelyn's wound. The hieroglyphs, though faded, told Ankit's story, his lover's betrayal, the dagger's strike, the heart torn free to bind his soul. Evelyn's vision flickered, pulling her into his past. His lover, her face her own, her hands red with his blood, her voice pleading for mercy that never came. The keeper stood beside him, a man then, his eyes human, bound to serve a pharaoh's rage. The vision broke, and Evelyn gasped, her wound flaring, black and alive, a reminder of the curse's claim. Lila's voice was a whisper, raw with fear. The glyphs, they say the vow can't be broken. Blood freeze, but only for a time. Evelyn nodded, her throat tight, the tomb's silence a predator waiting to strike. The corridor opened to a chamber she didn't recognize. Its walls bare save for a single carving. A viper-crowned figure, its chest hollow, its eyes glowing faintly, not with the keeper's fire, but with something older, deeper. Sand pooled at its base, smooth but moving, forming a heart that pulsed with the phantom rhythm in Evelyn's chest. Lila's breath hitched, her burned hands tracing the air, as if reading glyphs that weren't there. "It's him," she said. "Ankit, not the statue, but his soul." Evelyn's wound throbbed, black tendrils snaking through her veins, and she felt him. Not in the carving, but in her, his rage a heat that wasn't hers. The sand heart bled, dark and warm, and the keeper's form flickered, not at the chamber's edge, but within the carving, its voice a hiss, "The vow is yours." Evelyn stepped back, her wound a scream, her vision blurring. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands clean now, her eyes empty. The keeper knelt beside her, its human face restored, its voice soft, grieving. "You took what was his, and now you are his." The vision shattered, and the sand heart pulsed faster, blood welling, vipers coiling from its edges, their fangs grazing her boots. Lila grabbed her arm, her burned hands trembling, her voice urgent. "We have to leave. The tomb, it's not done." But the sand surged, blocking the corridor, forming a wall of eyes that stared, unblinking, their pupils glowing with Ankit's fire. The keeper's form solidified, tall and fraying, its claws scraping the sand, its voice a roar. "You cannot flee what you owe." The chamber shook, cracks splitting the walls, dust choking the air. Evelyn's wound was her heart now, black and pulsing, and she felt Ankit's soul, his betrayal, his vow. The sand heart rose, vipers slithering toward Lila, their fangs sinking into her burned hands, her scream raw as blood mixed with sand. Evelyn lunged, pulling Lila free, but the vipers were relentless, coiling around her legs, their venom burning through her wound. The keeper's eyes were everywhere, its voice a hiss, blood for blood. Evelyn's mind raced, the glyphs, Lila's words, the curse's truth. The heart was the key, the dagger the price, but Ankit's soul was the curse, and she was its anchor. She tore at the sand heart, her hands sinking into blood, finding something hard, cold, a shard of obsidian, etched with vipers, pulsing with the heart's rhythm. She raised the shard, its glow blinding, and plunged it into the sand heart's center, blood welling around it. The chamber shaking as if in pain. The keeper screamed, its form fraying into nothing, the sand wall collapsing, the eyes dissolving. Ankit's carving cracked, its chest splitting, sand pouring out. Not blood, its eyes dimming. The vipers sank, the sand heart stilled, and the chamber was silent, the air lighter, the curse's grip loosening. Lila gasped, her burned hands bleeding but free, her eyes wide with relief. Evelyn's wound was a faint pulse now, the black tendrils retreating, the phantom heart's rhythm fading. The tomb was quiet, but its silence was a trap, and the desert remembered. They stumbled from the chamber, the corridors guiding them out, the glyphs dull, their story told. The tomb's entrance loomed, the stone door ajar, the desert beyond calm. The dunes smooth under a fading sun. Lila clung to Evelyn, her voice a ghost. "It's not over. The vow is eternal." Evelyn nodded, the obsidian shard in her hand, its warmth a reminder of the curse's claim. The keeper was gone, but its gaze lingered, a shadow in her mind. As they stepped into the desert, the sand shifted, forming a single viper that watched until they crested the dune, and Evelyn knew. The tomb's call was hers, and Ankit's soul would wait. The desert stretched beyond the tomb's entrance, its dunes bathed in the dying light of a sun that offered no warmth. Dr. Evelyn Carver stood at the threshold, the obsidian shard clutched in her hand, its viper-etched surface faintly warm, a relic of the curse that refused to release her. The phantom pulse of the mummified heart was a whisper now, but it lingered in her chest, tying her to Ankit's eternal vow. Lila leaned against her, her burned hands bleeding through tattered wrappings, her eyes hollow with the weight of survival. The tomb behind them was silent, its corridors dim, the glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts dull as if spent. Marcus and Kareem were gone, their lives claimed by the pit, their blood the curse's toll. The keeper's absence was no comfort. Its ember-like eyes haunted Evelyn's mind, its voice a faint hiss, "The vow is yours." The desert was calm, but its smoothness was a deception, and Evelyn felt the tomb's call, a chain forged by her theft, strengthened by her defiance. The air was heavy with dust and the faint tang of blood as they stepped onto the sand, the Nile a distant shimmer, Cairo a dream too fragile to trust. Evelyn's wound, where the keeper's claws had grazed her, was a dull ache, the black tendrils retreating but not gone, a mark of Ankit's claim. The obsidian shard pulsed faintly, its warmth sinking with the phantom heart, and she tucked it into her satchel, its weight a reminder of the chamber where she'd plunged it into the sand heart, stilling the curse's hunger for a moment. Lila's voice was barely audible, cracked by grief. The glyphs said it's never over. Ankit's soul, it's in you now. Evelyn's throat tightened, the truth a blade, Her visions of Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands red with his blood, were no mere dreams. The curse was her, woven into her ambition, her guilt, her blood. The sand shifted, a subtle ripple that made Lila flinch, her burned hands clutching Evelyn's arm. A single viper formed, its coils glowing faintly, its eyes fixed on them, not attacking but watching. A sentinel of the desert's will. Evelyn's wound throbbed, and she felt Ankit's presence. Not in the sand, but within, his rage a heat that wasn't hers. The keeper's form flickered at the dune's crest, tall and fraying, its claws scraping the air, its voice a whisper. You cannot flee what you are. Lila's gasp was sharp, her eyes wide, but Evelyn didn't run. The shard in her satchel was a key, not to end the curse, but to bind it, to carry it beyond the tomb. The glyphs had told the story. Ankit's betrayal, his heart, his vow. But the keeper had revealed its heart. You are his. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt unpaid. Lila's hand tightened, her voice urgent. We need to destroy it. The shard. It's part of him. Evelyn shook her head. The shard's warmth a truth she couldn't deny. Destroying it might wake the curse fully, unleash Ankit's soul without restraint. The tomb had taken Marcus and Kareem, but it had spared her and Lila. A pause, not a pardon. The desert's silence was a trap, and the keeper's gaze was eternal. We go to Cairo, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. We report the tomb. Nothing more. Lila's eyes pleaded, but she nodded, her burned hands trembling, her grief a mirror of Evelyn's guilt. The viper in the sand dissolved, its eyes fading, but the dune shifted, forming a heart that pulsed once, blood seeping briefly before sinking away. They moved, their steps heavy, the Nile closer but no safer. Evelyn's wound was a constant, the shard's warmth a chain. The phantom heart's pulse a warning. The keeper didn't follow, but its presence was in the sand, the sky, her mind. The hieroglyph story was clear. Ankit's lover, her dagger. His heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. Evelyn had returned the heart, buried the dagger, offered the shard. But the curse was deeper, Ankit's soul of fire that burned in her. Lila's silence was heavy, her burned hands a reminder of the cost. Thomas, Marcus, Kareem, all gone, their blood the desert's price. As they crested a dune, the sand shifted again, forming a single eye that stared until they descended, and Evelyn knew. The tomb's call was hers, and Ankit's vow would follow her beyond the desert. The Nile's edge was in sight, a boat waiting, its crew oblivious to the curse that marked them. Evelyn's satchel was heavy with the shard, her wound a pulse of black, her mind a battlefield of Ankit's rage and her own. Lila's voice was a ghost. It'll find us, in Cairo or beyond. The keeper won't stop. Evelyn nodded. The truth a weight she'd carry forever. The desert was behind them, but its wrath was in her. The curse a shadow that no light could banish. As they approached the boat, the sand stirred one last time, a viper's hiss fading into the wind, and Evelyn felt the keeper's gaze. Not in the dunes, but within, a promise that the debt would come due. Chapter 7, Beneath the Sands. The Nile's current was a deceptive lullaby, its waters glinting under a moon that hung too low, casting shadows that danced like vipers across the boat's deck. Dr. Evelyn Carver sat at the stern, her hands gripping the obsidian shard, its viper-etched surface warm, pulsing faintly with the phantom rhythm of the mummified heart she'd left behind. The desert was a fading line on the horizon, but its curse clung to her, a weight heavier than the shard in her satchel. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had grazed her, throbbed with black tendrils that snaked through her chest, a mark of Ankit's claim. Lila sat nearby, her burned hands wrapped in fresh bandages, her eyes fixed on the water, as if searching for the glyphs that haunted her. The boat's crew, 3 weathered men, moved silently, their glances wary, sensing the shadow that followed their passengers. The tomb was behind them, but its call was in Evelyn's blood, Ankit's vow a fire that burned within her, and the keeper's gaze a constant pressure behind her eyes. The boat rocked gently, but the air was wrong, thick with the scent of dust and decay, as if the desert had followed them onto the water. Evelyn's mind churned with the tomb's hieroglyphs, Ankit's betrayal, his lover's dagger, his heart torn free to bind his soul. Her visions of the lover, her face her own, her hands red with his blood, were no longer dreams but truths. The keeper had named her the vessel, the debt unpaid, and the shard was her chain, tying her to Ankit's wrath. Lila's words from the desert echoed. The vow is eternal. The team was gone. Thomas, Marcus, Kareem. Their lives the curses toll, leaving only Lila, her burned hands a reminder of the cost. Evelyn's wound flared, black and alive, and she felt Ankit's presence, not in the Nile, but in her. His rage a heat that wasn't hers. A low hum broke the silence, not from the water, but from the shard in Evelyn's satchel. She pulled it out, its viper etchings glowing faintly, pulsing in time with her wound. Lila's breath hitched, her bandaged hands trembling as she leaned closer. "It's him," she whispered, her voice raw. "Ankit, the shard, it's part of the curse." The crew paused, their eyes narrowing, one man muttering about river spirits. Evelyn's wound throbbed, and the water rippled, forming a single eye that stared, its pupil glowing like the shard's. The keeper's form flickered on the shore, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her, its voice a hiss. "You cannot flee." The boat lurched, the crew shouting as the current turned against them, pulling them back toward the desert, toward the tomb. Lila's eyes widened, her bandaged hands tracing glyphs in the air. "The tomb's calling," she said. "It's not done with you." Evelyn's grip on the shard tightened, its warmth spreading through her, a poison that felt like truth. The Nile churned, vipers rising from its depths, their fangs glinting in the moonlight, coiling around the boat's hull. The crew scrambled, one man slashing at the water with an oar, but the vipers were relentless, their hisses whispering Ankit's name. Ankit, Ankit. Evelyn's wound was a scream, black tendrils choking her heart, and she saw it. Ankit's face in the water, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. The keeper's form solidified, not on the shore, but on the deck, its claws scraping the wood, its voice a roar. "The debt is yours." Lila screamed, her bandaged hands clawing at the air, her chant returning, a guttural plea that made the water shake. The crew's shouts turned to panic, one man falling overboard, his scream cut short as the vipers pulled him under. Evelyn stood, the shard raised, its glow blinding, her wound a fire that matched Ankit's rage. The glyphs from the tomb were alive in her mind, his lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving, bound to serve, and she knew. The shard was the last key, not to end the curse but to bind it, to carry it beyond the tomb. She plunged the shard into the deck, its viper etchings flaring, blood welling around it, the boat shaking as if in pain. The keeper screamed, its form fraying into vipers that dissolved into the water, its eyes dimming. Ankit's face sank, the Nile stilling, the vipers retreating, the current calming. The crew, too now, stared at Evelyn, their faces pale, their hands trembling. Lila's chant faded, her eyes wide with grief, her bandaged hands bleeding through the cloth. The boat drifted the Nile smooth, the desert a shadow on the horizon. Evelyn's wound was a faint pulse, the black tendrils retreating, the shard's warmth fading but not gone. Lila's voice was a ghost. "It's not over. The tomb, it's in you." Evelyn nodded, the truth a weight she'd carry to Cairo, to the world beyond. The keeper was gone, but its gaze lingered, a shadow in her mind. The desert was behind them, but its wrath was in her, the curse of fire that no water could quench. As the boat moved, the Nile rippled, a single viper watching until they rounded a bend, and Evelyn knew. The tomb's call was hers, and Ankit's vow would follow her forever. The Nile's surface was a mirror, reflecting a sky bruised with stars, but its calm was a lie that DR. Evelyn Carver could feel in her bones. The boat drifted forward, its wooden hull creaking under the weight of silence. The two remaining crew members casting wary glances at her as they steered toward Cairo. The obsidian shard lay in her satchel, its viper-etched surface no longer glowing but heavy. A relic of Ankit's curse that pulsed faintly with the phantom rhythm of the mummified heart. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, was a dull ache. The black tendrils retreating but alive, snaking through her chest like roots of a poison tree. Lila sat slumped against the railing, her burned hands bleeding through their bandages. Her eyes fixed on the water as if it might rise again with vipers or glyphs. The desert was a fading shadow behind them, but its wrath was in Evelyn. The tombs call a chain that tightened with every mile. The keeper's voice lingered, a hiss in her mind. The debt is yours. The air grew colder, the Nile scent of mud and reeds mingling with a faint tang of decay that shouldn't have followed them from the tomb. Evelyn's fingers brushed the shard, its warmth stirring the phantom pulse in her chest, a rhythm that wasn't hers but Ankit's, tying her to his betrayal, his vow, his rage. The hieroglyphs from the tomb were burned into her memory. His lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal task. That vision was her truth now. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt unpaid. Lila's warning, the tomb's in you, was a blade, and Evelyn felt it with every breath, the curse of fire that no river could douse. A low hum broke the night, not from the water, but from the satchel at Evelyn's side. She pulled out the shard, its viper etchings faintly alive, pulsing in time with her wound. Lila's head snapped up, her bandaged hands trembling, her voice a cracked whisper. It's calling again. The tomb, it knows we're leaving. The crew paused, their oars still, one man muttering a prayer to gods Evelyn didn't know. The Nile rippled, forming a heart that pulsed once, blood seeping briefly before sinking away. Evelyn's wound flared, black and hot, and she saw it. Ankit's face in the water, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. The keeper's form flickered on the far bank, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her, its voice a roar. You are marked. The boat lurched, the current turning sharp, pulling them toward the desert, toward the tomb's open maw. Lila scrambled to her feet, her burned hands clutching Evelyn's arm, her eyes wild. We have to destroy it, the shard. It's the last piece. Evelyn's grip tightened, the shard's warmth a truth she couldn't deny. Destroying it might unleash Ankit's soul fully, a rage without restraint. The tomb had spared them, but it was a pause, not a pardon, and the shard was her burden, a key to the curse's heart. The Nile churned, vipers rising from its depths, their fangs glinting, coiling around the boat's hull. The crew shouted, one man slashing at the water within, but the vipers were relentless, their hisses whispering, Ankit, Ankit. Evelyn's wound was a scream, black tendrils choking her heart, and the keeper stepped onto the deck, its claws scraping the wood, its voice a hiss, blood for blood. Evelyn raised the shard, its glow blinding, her wound a fire that matched Ankit's rage. The glyphs were alive in her mind, his lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving, and she knew. The shard was the curse's anchor, tying her to Ankit's soul. She plunged it into the deck, blood welling around it, the boat shaking as vipers dissolved into the water. The keeper's form fraying into nothing, its eyes dimming. Ankit's face sank, the Nile stilling, the current calming. The crew, trembling, resumed their oars, their prayers louder now. Lila's bandaged hands bled, her eyes wide with grief, her voice a ghost. It's not enough. The vow, it's in you. Evelyn nodded, the shard's warmth fading but not gone. her wound a faint pulse. The black tendrils alive. The boat drifted, the Nile smooth, Cairo's lights faint on the horizon. Evelyn's satchel was heavy, the shard of chain she'd carry beyond the river. The keeper was gone, but its gaze lingered, a shadow in her mind. The desert was behind them, but its wrath was in her, the curse of fire that no city could extinguish. As they moved, the Nile rippled, a single viper watching until they rounded a bend, and Evelyn knew. The tomb's call was hers, and Ankit's vow would follow her forever. The Nile's waters were a false promise. Their gentle lapping against the boat's hull a mockery of the chaos that still burned in Dr. Evelyn Carver's veins. Cairo's lights flickered on the horizon, a distant beacon of civilization. But the desert's curse clung to her, heavier than the obsidian shard in her satchel. Its viper-etched surface was cool now, its faint pulse a shadow of the mummified heart's rhythm. But it tethered her to Ankit's wrath, to the tomb's unending call. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, pulsed faintly. The black tendrils snaking through her chest, a living mark of the pharaoh's claim. Lila sat across from her, her burned hands bleeding through fresh bandages, her eyes hollow, staring into the night, as if the Nile might spit up the glyphs that haunted her. The two crew members rowed in silence, their prayers a low hum, their glances sharp with fear of the women they carried. The keeper's absence was no relief. Its ember-like eyes lingered in Evelyn's mind, its voice a hiss, blood for blood. The air was thick with the scent of river mud and a faint, unnatural decay, as if the tomb's breath had followed them. Evelyn's fingers brushed the shard, its weight a reminder of the pit. The blood pool, the moment she'd plunged it into the sand heart, stilling Ankit's rage for a fleeting breath. The hieroglyphs were etched in her memory. His lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to serve an eternal vow. That truth was her prison. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt unpaid. Lila's words, "The vows in you," were a chain, and Evelyn felt it tighten with every stroke of the oars. The Nile's calm a lie that hid the desert's hunger. A soft scrape broke the silence, not from the water but from the boat's hold, where their crates of artifacts, tools, fragments, relics from the tomb, were stored. Lila's head snapped up, her bandaged hands trembling, her voice a cracked whisper. "It's him. Ankit. He's still here." The crew paused, their oars still. One man crossing himself, his eyes darting to the hold. Evelyn's wound flared, black and alive, and she felt the shard pulse, its viper etchings glowing faintly, sinking with the phantom heart in her chest. The Nile rippled, forming a single viper that slithered across the surface, its eyes glowing like the keeper's, its hiss whispering, "Ankit, Ankit." The boat rocked, the crew shouting as the current twisted, pulling them back toward the desert, toward the tomb's open jaws. Evelyn scrambled to the hold, her wound a scream, the shard in her hand glowing brighter. The crates were stacked tightly, but one was ajar, its contents glinting in the moonlight. An alabaster jar, its viper-carved lid cracked, its surface etched with glyphs that pulsed with the shard's rhythm. Lila followed, her bandaged hands bleeding, her eyes wide with dread. "It's from the crypt," she said, her voice shaking. The jars, they held his soul. The crew's prayers grew louder, one man grabbing an oar, ready to abandon ship. But the Nile surged, vipers rising from its depths, their fangs coiling around the hull, trapping them. The keeper's form flickered in the hold, tall and fraying, its claws scraping the jar, its voice a roar, "The debt is yours." Evelyn's wound choked her, black tendrils snaking through her heart, and she saw Ankit's face in the jar's glow, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. She smashed the jar, the shard's glow blinding as it struck, dust and bones spilling out, vipers slithering from the wreckage, their fangs grazing her legs, drawing blood that mixed with the Nile's. The keeper screamed, its form fraying into the dust, its eyes dimming. But Ankit's presence grew stronger, his voice a hiss. "You took what is mine." The boat shook, the vipers tightening. The crew's screams cut short as one man fell, his body sinking into the water, claimed by the curse. Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the Nile tremble. The glyphs on the shard flaring. Ankit's betrayal, his heart, his vow. Evelyn's wound was her heart now, black and pulsing, and she felt Ankit's soul, not in the jar, but in her. His rage of fire that burned her own. She plunged the shard into the hold's floor, blood welling around it. The boat lurching as the vipers dissolved, the Nile stilling, the keeper's form gone. Ankit's face sank, the current calming, the crew, one man now, gasping, his prayers a sob. Lila's bandaged hands bled, her chant fading, her eyes pleading. "It's not enough," she whispered. "The tomb, it's alive." Evelyn nodded, the shard's warmth a chain, her wound a faint pulse, the black tendrils alive. The Nile was smooth, Cairo closer, but the curse was in her, a shadow no city could banish. As they drifted, the water rippled, a single eye watching until they rounded a bend, and Evelyn knew the tomb's call was hers, and Ankit's vow would follow her to the end. Chapter 8. The Ritual's Price. Cairo's lights glittered like a mirage, their warmth a cruel contrast to the chill that gripped Dr. Evelyn Carver as the boat docked at the city's edge. The Nile was behind them, its waters smooth, but its vipers and eyes lingered in her mind, a reminder of the desert's reach. The obsidian shard rested in her satchel, its viper-etched surface cool but heavy, a relic of Ankit's curse that pulsed faintly with the phantom rhythm of the mummified heart. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, was a steady ache, the black tendrils snaking through her chest, a living mark of the pharaoh's claim. Lila stood beside her, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her eyes hollow, scanning the bustling docks as if expecting the sand to rise. The sole surviving crew member, a wiry man named Yusuf, unloaded their crates with trembling hands, his prayers a low hum, his gaze avoiding Evelyn's. The tomb was miles away, but its call was in her blood, Ankit's vow a fire that burned within, and the keeper's gaze a shadow that followed her into the city. The air was thick with the scent of spices, sweat, and river mud, but a faint tang of decay clung to Evelyn, as if the tomb's breath had seeped into her skin. The hieroglyphs were a constant in her mind. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal task. That truth was her cage. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt unpaid. Lila's warning, the tomb's alive, was a weight, and Evelyn felt it in the shard's pulse, in her wound's throb, in the phantom heart that refused to fade. The city's noise, vendors shouting, carts rattling, laughter, felt distant, a world she no longer belonged to. The curse was in her, and Cairo was no sanctuary. They moved through the docks, Yusuf leading them to a warehouse where their crates would be stored before reporting the tomb's discovery. The streets were alive, but the shadows were wrong, too sharp, too fluid, curling like vipers at the edges of Evelyn's vision. Lila's bandaged hands trembled, her voice a cracked whisper. "It's here. The curse, it followed us." Evelyn's wound flared, black and alive, and she felt the shard pulse, its viper etchings glowing faintly in her satchel. The warehouse loomed, a cavern of crates and dust, its air heavy with the scent of old wood and something sharper. Like blood, Yusuf opened a crate, his hands shaking, revealing artifact from the tomb. Amulets, fragments, a viper-carved jar that shouldn't have been there. "This wasn't packed," he said, his voice breaking, stepping back as the jar's lid glowed, pulsing with the shard's rhythm. The warehouse shook, a low rumble that sent dust cascading from the rafters. The jar's glyphs flared, spirals, eyes, hearts, matching the tombs, whispering, "Ankit, Ankit." Evelyn's wound was a scream, black tendrils choking her heart, and the keeper's form flickered in the shadows, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her. Its voice was a roar, "The debt is yours." Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the air tremble, her bandaged hands bleeding as she traced glyphs in the dust. Yusuf screamed, running for the door, but the sand rose, not from the floor but from the crate, forming vipers that coiled around his legs, pulling him down, his cries cut short as blood welled, dark and warm. Evelyn's satchel burned, the shard's pulse sinking with her wound, and she saw Ankit's face in the sand, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. She grabbed the shard, its glow blinding, her wound a fire that matched Ankit's rage. The glyphs told the story. His lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving, and she knew. The shard was the curse's anchor, the ritual's key. She smashed the jar, the shard's viper etchings flaring as it struck, dust and vipers spilling out, their fangs grazing her arms, drawing blood that mixed with the sands. The keeper screamed, its form fraying into the dust, its eyes dimming. But Ankit's presence grew, his voice a hiss. "You took what is mine." The warehouse shook, crates toppling, the sand surging, forming a heart that pulsed with Evelyn's blood. Lila's chant was a scream, her bandaged hands bleeding, and Evelyn felt the ritual's price, not just blood, but her, the vessel, the lover reborn. She plunged the shard into the sand heart, blood welling around it, the warehouse shaking as if in pain. The keeper's form dissolved, Ankit's face sank, the vipers retreating, the sand stilling. Lila fell, her chant fading, her eyes wide with grief. The warehouse was silent, Yusuf gone, his blood a stain on the floor. Evelyn's wound was a faint pulse, the black tendrils alive. The shard's warmth a chain. Lila's voice was a ghost. "It's not enough. The ritual, it demands you." Evelyn nodded. The truth a weight she'd carry beyond Cairo. The curse was in her, a shadow no city could banish. As they stumbled into the night, the sand stirred, a single eye watching until they vanished into the streets, and Evelyn knew. The ritual's price was hers, and Ankit's vow would never let her go. The streets of Cairo were a labyrinth of noise and shadow, their bustle a thin veil over the curse that clung to Dr. Evelyn Carver like a second skin. The warehouse was behind them, its blood-soaked sand and shattered jar a fresh wound in her memory. But the city offered no refuge. The obsidian shard rested in her satchel, its viper-etched surface cool yet heavy, pulsing faintly with the phantom rhythm of the mummified heart. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, was a steady throb, black tendrils snaking through her heart, a mark of Ankit's unrelenting claim. Lila stumbled beside her, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her eyes darting to every alley as if the desert's vipers might slither from the cobblestones. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, spices, and a faint decay that followed Evelyn, a reminder of the tomb's breath. The keeper's voice lingered, a hiss in her mind. "The debt is yours." The city's lights flickered, casting shadows that curled like glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts, etched in Evelyn's vision by the tomb's unending story. Ankit's hieroglyphs were a constant. His lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal vow. That truth was her prison. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt unpaid. Lila's words, "The ritual demands you," were a chain, and Evelyn felt it tighten with every step, the shards pulse a drum that matched her wound. The crowds parted around them, sensing something wrong, their whispers trailing like sand. A vendor's cart rattled past, its wheels grinding, and Evelyn flinched, the sound too close to the tomb's rumble, the keeper's claws. They reached a small inn, Its walls cracked, its sign faded, a place to hide before reporting the tomb's discovery. The innkeeper, an old woman with eyes like flint, took their coin without questions, her gaze lingering on Evelyn's satchel, on Lila's bandaged hands. The room was small, its air heavy with dust, the single window shuttered against the night. Evelyn set the shard on a table, its viper etchings faintly alive, pulsing in time with her wound. Lila collapsed onto a cot, her burned hands trembling, her voice a cracked whisper. It's not over. The shard, it's calling him. Evelyn's wound flared, black and alive, and she felt Ankit's presence. Not in the room, but in her, his rage a heat that wasn't hers. The city's noise faded, replaced by a low hum. Not from the shard, but from the walls, the floor, the air itself. The room shook, a subtle tremor that sent dust drifting from the ceiling. The shard's glow brightened, its viper etchings flaring, and the floor's dust stirred, forming a heart that pulsed once, blood seeping briefly before sinking away. Evelyn's wound was a scream, black tendrils choking her heart, and the keeper's form flickered in the shadows, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her. Its voice was a roar, blood for blood. Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the walls tremble, her bandaged hands bleeding as she traced glyphs in the air. The inn's walls cracked, sand pouring from the fissures, forming vipers that slithered toward Evelyn, their fangs glinting, their hisses whispering. Ankit, Ankit. She grabbed the shard, its glow blinding, her wound a fire that matched Ankit's rage, and saw his face in the sand, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. Evelyn swung the shard, not to strike but to defy, its pulse a scream that shook the room. The vipers lunged. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving, and Evelyn knew the ritual's price was her, the vessel, the lover reborn. The shard was the key, not to end the curse but to bind it, to offer herself to Ankit's vow. She plunged the shard into the sand heart, blood welling around it, the room shaking as if in pain. The keeper screamed, its form fraying into nothing. Ankit's face sinking, the vipers dissolving, the sand stilling. The walls were silent, the dust settled, but Evelyn's wound burned, black tendrils choking her heart, her vision darkening. Lila fell, her chant fading, her bandaged hands bleeding, her eyes pleading. "You can't keep running," she whispered. "The curse, it's you." Evelyn nodded, the shard's warmth a chain, her wound a pulse. The black tendrils alive. The inn was quiet, but its silence was a trap, and the city remembered. She lifted the shard, its viper etchings dull but heavy, and felt Ankit's soul. Not in the sand, but in her, his rage her own. The ritual demanded a choice, her life or the curse's end. She stood, the shard in her hand, Lila's gaze await, and knew the debt was hers, and Cairo was no escape. As they stepped into the night, the street's dust stirred, a single eye watching until they vanished into the city, and Evelyn felt the keeper's gaze. Not in the shadows, but within, a promise that the ritual's price would come due. Chapter 9. The Pharaoh's Vow. Cairo's streets were a fever dream, their flickering lamps and shouting vendors a fragile mask over the curse that pulsed in Dr. Evelyn Carver's veins. The night was thick with heat and the scent of dust, but a colder decay clung to her, as if the tomb's breath had woven itself into her skin. The obsidian shard rested in her satchel, its viper-etched surface heavy, its faint pulse a tether to the mummified heart's phantom rhythm. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, was a fire, black tendrils snaking through her heart, a mark of Ankit's unrelenting claim. Lila trailed behind, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her steps unsteady, her eyes scanning the shadows for glyphs or vipers. The inn was behind them, its blood-soaked sand and shattered walls a fresh scar, but Cairo was no sanctuary. The keeper's voice lingered, a hiss in Evelyn's mind, blood for blood. The ritual's price was her, and the city was merely a stage for its demand. The hieroglyphs were a constant torment. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal vow. That truth was Evelyn's cage. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt unpaid. Lila's words, "The curse is you," were a blade, and Evelyn felt it with every step. The shards pulse a drum that matched her wound. They moved toward the British Museum's local office, a place to report the tomb's discovery, to bury their truths in paperwork and lies. The streets were alive, but the shadows were wrong. Curling like vipers, forming fleeting glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts that only Evelyn saw. Her wound flared, black and alive, and she felt Ankit's presence, not in the city but in her. His rage a heat that wasn't hers. A low hum broke the chaos, not from the streets, but from the satchel at her side. Evelyn's hand trembled as she pulled out the shard, its viper etchings glowing faintly, pulsing in time with her wound. Lila's breath hitched, her bandaged hands clutching at the air, her voice a cracked whisper. "It's him. Ankit. He's waking." The crowd parted, sensing something wrong, their whispers trailing like sand. The shard's glow brightened, and the cobblestones stirred, dust forming a single eye that stared, its pupil pulsing with the shard's rhythm. The keeper's form flickered in an alley, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on Evelyn, its voice a roar, "The debt is yours." The street shook, a subtle tremor that sent vendors scrambling, their carts rattling, and Evelyn's wound was a scream, black tendrils choking her heart, Ankit's face rising in the dust, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. Lila grabbed Evelyn's arm, her bandaged hands bleeding, her eyes wild. "We have to end it now. The shard, it's the last piece." Evelyn's grip tightened. The shard's warmth a truth she couldn't deny. Destroying it might unleash Ankit's soul fully, a rage without restraint, but keeping it bound her to the curse, to the ritual's price. The street's dust surged, forming vipers that slithered toward them, their fangs glinting, their hisses whispering. "Ankit, Ankit." The crowd screamed, fleeing, but the vipers were relentless, coiling around Evelyn's legs, drawing blood that mixed with the dust. The keeper stepped from the alley, its claws scraping the cobblestones, its voice a hiss, blood for blood. Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the air tremble, her bandaged hands tracing glyphs in the dust, her blood seeping into the street. Evelyn raised the shard, its glow blinding, her wound a fire that matched Ankit's rage. The glyphs were alive in her mind, his lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving, and she knew. The shard was the curse's anchor, the ritual's key. She smashed it against the cobblestones, its viper etchings flaring, dust and vipers spilling out, their fangs grazing her arms, drawing blood that fed the street. The keeper screamed, its form fraying into the dust, its eyes dimming, but Ankit's presence grew, his form rising from the cobblestones, not sand but flesh. His viper crown hissing, his voice a roar. "You took what is mine." The street shook, buildings cracking, the dust forming a heart that pulsed with Evelyn's blood. Lila's chant a scream that couldn't stop it. Evelyn's wound was her heart now, black and pulsing, and she felt Ankit's soul, not in the street but in her as rage her own. The ritual demanded her. The vessel, the lover reborn. She stepped toward Ankit, her blood mixing with the dust, her wound a fire that burned for him. Lila's chant faltered, her bandaged hands falling, her eyes pleading. "Don't. It'll take you." But the keeper's voice was a hiss. "Pay or perish." Evelyn's vision blurred. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands clean, her voice silent. The street was a tomb. The dust its sand, and Ankit's form lunged, his vipers coiling, his wound bleeding her name. The ritual's price was clear, her life or the curse's end. She raised her empty hands, the shard gone, Her wound her offering, and felt the curse's weight, Ankit's vow, the keeper's gaze, all demanding blood. The streets of Cairo were a battlefield, the cobblestones slick with dust and blood as Dr. Evelyn Carver faced Ankit's wrath. The pharaoh's form towered before her, his viper crown hissing, his chest a gaping wound that bled sand and blood, his ember-like eyes burning through her soul. The obsidian shard was shattered, its viper-etched fragments scattered in the dust, but its phantom pulse thrummed in Evelyn's chest, tying her to the mummified heart, to the curse that demanded her life. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, was a furnace, black tendrils choking her heart, a mark of Ankit's unrelenting claim. Lila stood frozen, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her chants silenced by terror, her eyes pleading as the dust swirled, forming glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts, that pulsed with Evelyn's blood. The keeper's form flickered in the shadows, tall and fraying, its voice a hiss, pay or perish. The city's noise, screams, collapsing carts, distant bells, was a fading echo the street a tomb, and Evelyn was its offering. The hieroglyphs were alive in her mind. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal vow. That truth was her sentence. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt unpaid. Lila's plea, "It'll take you," was a distant cry. Drowned by Ankit's roar, "You took what is mine." The dust surged, vipers rising from the cobblestones, their fangs glinting, coiling around Evelyn's legs, drawing blood that fed the street's heart. Her wound was her heart now, black and pulsing, and she felt Ankit's soul, not in the dust but in her, his rage of fire that consumed her own. The keeper's claws scraped the air, its eyes inches from hers, its voice a roar, blood for blood. The ritual's price was clear, her life or the curse's end. Evelyn stepped toward Ankit, her empty hands raised, her blood mixing with the dust, her wound a fire that burned for him. The vipers tightened, their venom searing through her veins, her vision blurring. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands clean, her voice silent, pleading for mercy that never came. The street shook, buildings cracking, the dust heart pulsing faster, blood welling, warm and sticky, pooling around her boots. Lila lunged, her bandaged hands grabbing Evelyn's arm, her voice a scream. "You can't. The glyphs, they say the vessel binds the vow. If you die, he's free." But the keeper's form solidified, its claws sinking into Lila's shoulders, blood seeping, her scream cut short as she fell, her burned hands twitching, her eyes wide with grief. Evelyn's wound was a scream, black tendrils choking her vision, and she saw the glyph's truth. The ritual demanded blood, but not just hers. The heart, the dagger, the shard, they were keys, but the vessel was the lock, binding Ankit's soul to the earth. If she died, his rage would be unleashed, unbound, eternal. She fought the vipers, her hands tearing at their coils, blood streaming, but Ankit's form was closer, his viper crown hissing, his wound bleeding her name. The keeper's voice was a hiss. Choose. Evelyn's mind raced. Lila's words, the glyphs, the curse's weight. She couldn't die, but she couldn't live as his vessel, carrying his rage beyond Cairo, beyond the desert. The dust heart pulsed, the vipers tightened, and she saw the keeper's human face, its eyes grieving. Bound to serve, a prisoner like her, she crawled toward Lila, her blood mixing with the streets, her wound a fire that refused to fade. The dust heart was a beacon, its glyphs flaring, Ankit's betrayal, his heart, his vow. Evelyn grabbed a shard fragment, its viper etchings glowing, and plunged it into the dust heart's center, blood welling around it. The street shaking as if in pain. Ankit's form roared, his vipers dissolving, his wound bleeding sand, his eyes dimming. The keeper screamed, its form fraying into nothing, its claws releasing Lila. Its eyes fading. The dust heart collapsed. The vipers sinking. The cobblestones stilling. The city's noise returning. Screams, bells, footsteps. Lila gasped, her bandaged hands bleeding, her eyes wide with relief, but her voice was a ghost. It's not enough. The vow, it's still in you. Evelyn's wound was a faint pulse, the black tendrils retreating but alive. The shard fragment dull but heavy in her hand. The street was a ruin, dust and blood staining the cobblestones, the crowd returning, their faces pale, their whispers trailing like sand. Ankit's form was gone, the keeper's gaze a shadow, but Evelyn felt them in her, their rage, their grief, their vow. The ritual had paused, not ended, and the vessel was hers to carry. She helped Lila stand, her bandaged hands trembling, her grief a mirror of Evelyn's guilt. The British Museum's office was close, a place to report the tomb, to bury the truth. But the curse was alive, a fire no city could extinguish. As they moved, the dust stirred, a single viper watching until they turned a corner, and Evelyn knew. The Pharaoh's vow was hers, and the keeper would wait for her blood. Cairo's dawn was a blade of light cutting through the haze, but its warmth did nothing to loosen the curse's grip on Dr. Evelyn Carver. The British Museum's local office loomed ahead, a squat building of faded stone, its promise of bureaucracy a fragile shield against the tomb's shadow. The obsidian shard fragment rested in her satchel, its viper-etched surface dull but heavy, a splinter of Ankit's curse that pulsed faintly with the phantom rhythm of the mummified heart. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, was a steady throb, black tendrils snaking through her heart, a mark of the Pharaoh's unrelenting claim. Lila limped beside her, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her eyes hollow, scanning the waking city for vipers or glyphs. The street's blood and dust were behind them, but the ritual's price was a chain, and Evelyn felt it tighten with every step. The keeper's voice lingered, a hiss in her mind. The debt is yours. The city stirred, vendors shouting, carts rattling, muezzins calling, but the air was wrong, thick with a decay that followed Evelyn like a shadow. The hieroglyphs were a torment. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal vow. That truth was her sentence. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt unpaid. Lila's warning, the vows in you, was a weight, and Evelyn felt it in the shard's pulse, in her wound's fire, in the phantom heart that refused to fade. The office's door was close, a place to report the tomb, to bury their truths and lies. But the curse was alive, a fire no paper could extinguish. A low hum broke the morning's clamor, not from the streets, but from the satchel at her side. Evelyn's hand trembled as she pulled out the shard fragment, its viper etchings glowing faintly, pulsing in time with her wound. Lila's breath hitched, her bandaged hands trembling, her voice a cracked whisper. It's calling. Ankit, he's not done. The street's dust stirred, forming a single eye that stared, its pupil glowing like the shards. The keeper's form flickered in the crowd, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on Evelyn, its voice a roar, blood for blood. The ground shook, a subtle tremor that sent passers-by stumbling, their shouts drowned by the hum. Evelyn's wound was a scream, black tendrils choking her heart, and she saw Ankit's face in the dust, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. Lila grabbed Evelyn's arm, her bandaged hands bleeding, her eyes wild. We have to finish it, the ritual. The shard, it's the last key. Evelyn's grip tightened, the shard's warmth a truth she couldn't deny. The ritual demanded her, the vessel, but Lila's words from the street echoed. If you die, he's free. Destroying the shard might bind Ankit's soul, but it might also unleash his rage, unbound, eternal. The dust surged, vipers rising from the cobblestones, their fangs glinting, coiling around Evelyn's legs, drawing blood that fed the street's eye. The keeper stepped from the crowd, its claws scraping the air, its voice a hiss, "Pay or perish." Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the dust tremble, her bandaged hands tracing glyphs, her blood seeping into the street. Evelyn raised the shard fragment, its glow blinding, her wound a fire that matched Ankit's rage. The glyphs were alive, his lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving. Bound to serve, a prisoner like her. She smashed the shard against the cobblestones, its viper etchings flaring, dust and vipers spilling out, their fangs grazing her arms, drawing blood that fed the dust eye. Ankit's form rose, not dust but flesh, his viper crown hissing, his voice a roar. "You took what is mine." The street shook, buildings cracking, the dust eye pulsing with Evelyn's blood. Lila's chant was a scream, her bandaged hands bleeding, and Evelyn felt the ritual's truth. The vessel binds the vow, and she was the lock. She stepped toward Ankit, her blood mixing with the dust, her wound a fire that burned for him. The vipers tightened, their venom searing, her vision blurring. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands clean, her voice silent. The keeper's claws sank into her shoulders, blood welling, but she fought, her hands tearing at the dust eye, finding nothing but sand. The ritual demanded blood, but not just hers, it demanded the vow's end. She screamed, not for mercy but defiance, her wound her offering, her life the price. The dust eye collapsed, Ankit's form roaring, his vipers dissolving, his wound bleeding sand, his eyes dimming. The keeper's form frayed, its claws releasing her, its eyes fading. The street stilled, the vipers sinking, the crowd returning, their faces pale, their whispers trailing like sand. Lila gasped, her bandaged hands bleeding, her eyes wide with grief. "It's not over," she whispered. "The vow, it's eternal." Evelyn's wound was a faint pulse. The black tendrils alive, the shard's fragments gone, but its weight remained. The office was steps away, but the curse was in her, a shadow no report could banish. She helped Lila forward, her grief a mirror of Evelyn's guilt. As they reached the door, the dust stirred, a single viper watching until they entered, and Evelyn knew the Pharaoh's vow was hers, and the keeper's gaze would follow her blood. The British Museum's Cairo office was a tomb of its own, its air stale with the scent of ink, dust, and forgotten relics. Dr. Evelyn Carver stood before a cluttered desk, her hands trembling as she handed over a report that buried the truth of the tomb in sterile prose, coordinates, artifacts. A sanitized discovery stripped of blood and curses. The obsidian shard was gone, its viper-etched fragments scattered in Cairo's streets, but its weight lingered in her satchel, a phantom tether to the mummified heart's rhythm. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, pulsed faintly, black tendrils snaking through her heart, a mark of Ankit's unrelenting claim. Lila sat in a corner, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her eyes hollow, staring at the floor as if the glyphs might rise from the tiles. The official, a bespectacled man named Hargrove, skimmed the report, his question sharp but oblivious to the desert's wrath. The keeper's voice hissed in Evelyn's mind, "The debt is yours." The ritual's price was unpaid, and the city was no refuge. The office's walls were lined with maps and artifacts, their shadows curling like vipers in the lamplight, forming fleeting glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts that only Evelyn saw. The hieroglyphs were a torment. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal vow. That truth was her prison. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt eternal. Lila's warning, the vows eternal, was a chain, and Evelyn felt it in her wound's fire, in the phantom heart that refused to fade. Hargrove's voice droned, asking about the team's losses, Thomas, Marcus, Kareem, but Evelyn's answers were vague. Her mind in the tomb, the pit, the street where Ankit's form had risen, his viper crown hissing, his wound bleeding her name. A low hum broke the official's questions. Not from the room, but from Evelyn's satchel, where the shard's absence burned like a wound. She froze, her wound flaring, black and alive, and the floor's dust stirred, forming a single eye that stared, its pupil pulsing with the phantom heart's rhythm. Lila's breath hitched, her bandaged hands trembling, her voice a cracked whisper. He's here. Ankit, he knows. Hargrove frowned, oblivious, but the room shook, a subtle tremor that sent papers fluttering, the lamplight flickering. The keeper's form flickered in the shadows, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on Evelyn, its voice a roar, blood for blood. The dust surged, vipers rising from the tiles, their fangs glinting, coiling around Evelyn's legs. Drawing blood that fed the eye, Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the walls tremble, her bandaged hands bleeding as she traced glyphs in the air. Evelyn's wound was a scream, black tendrils choking her heart, and she saw Ankit's face in the dust, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. Hargrove shouted, backing away, but the vipers were relentless, their hisses whispering, "Ankit, Ankit." The keeper stepped from the shadows, its claws scraping the floor, its voice a hiss, "Pay or perish." Evelyn's hands were empty, the shard gone, but her wound was her offering, her blood the ritual's price. The glyphs were alive, his lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving, bound to serve, a prisoner like her. She tore at the dust eye, her hands sinking into blood, finding nothing but sand, her wound a fire that burned for Ankit. Lila lunged, her bandaged hands grabbing Evelyn, her voice a scream. "You can't give in. The vessel binds the vow." The keeper's claws sank into Lila's shoulders, blood welling, her scream cut short as she fell, her burned hands twitching. Evelyn's vision blurred. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands clean, her voice silent. The ritual demanded her, but Lila's words echoed. "If you die, he's free." She fought the vipers, her blood mixing with the dust, her wound a fire that refused to fade. The dust eye pulsed, the vipers tightened, and Ankit's form rose, his viper crown hissing, his wound bleeding her name. Evelyn screamed, not for mercy but defiance, her wound her anchor, her life the lock. She plunged her hands into the dust, eye blood welling, the room shaking as if in pain. Ankit's form roared, his vipers dissolving, his eyes dimming. The keeper's form frayed, its claws releasing Lila, its eyes fading. The room stilled, the vipers sinking, the dust eye collapsing, Hargrove gasping, his questions forgotten. Lila's bandaged hands bled, her eyes wide with grief, her voice a ghost. "It's not over. The keeper, it's bound to you." Evelyn's wound was a faint pulse, the black tendrils alive, the curse a shadow no office could banish. The report was signed, the tomb's truth buried, but Ankit's vow was in her, a fire no city could extinguish. She helped Lila stand, her grief a mirror of Evelyn's guilt. As they left, the dust stirred, a single viper watching until they stepped into the dawn, and Evelyn knew. The Pharaoh's vow was hers, and the keeper's gaze would follow her blood forever. Chapter 10. Dust and Eternity. Cairo's dawn bled into a hazy morning. The city's clamor a distant hum as Dr. Evelyn Carver stepped from the British Museum's office. The weight of her lies heavier than the satchel at her side. The obsidian shard was gone, its viper-etched fragments scattered in the streets, but its phantom pulse lingered in her chest, a faint echo of the mummified heart that bound her to Ankit's curse. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, was a dull ache, black tendrils snaking through her heart, a mark of the Pharaoh's unrelenting claim. Lila followed, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her steps faltering, her eyes haunted by the glyphs that refused to fade. The report was filed, the tomb's truth buried in sterile words, but the curse was alive, a fire in Evelyn's blood that no city could extinguish. The keeper's voice hissed in her mind, "The debt is yours." The ritual's price was unpaid, and Cairo was a fleeting pause, not an escape. The streets were alive with vendors and carts, but the air was wrong, thick with a decay that clung to Evelyn like a shadow. The hieroglyphs were a constant torment. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal vow. That truth was her prison. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt eternal. Lila's warning, "The keeper's bound to you," was a chain, and Evelyn felt it in her wound's pulse, in the phantom heart that whispered Ankit's rage. They moved toward the docks, a ship waiting to carry them from Egypt, from the desert, from the tomb's call. But the shadows were wrong, curling like vipers, forming fleeting glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts that pulsed with her blood. A low hum broke the city's din, not from the streets, but from within Evelyn, her wound flaring, black and alive. The cobblestones stirred, dust forming a single viper that slithered across her path, its eyes glowing, its hiss whispering, "Ankit, Ankit." Lila's bandaged hands trembled, her voice a cracked whisper, "It's not done. The curse, it's in you." The crowd parted, sensing something wrong, their whispers trailing like sand. Evelyn's wound was a scream, and she felt Ankit's presence, not in the dust, but in her. His rage a heat that wasn't hers. The keeper's form flickered in an alley, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her, its voice a hiss, blood for blood. The street shook, a subtle tremor that sent vendors scrambling, and Evelyn saw Ankit's face in the dust, his viper crown hissing, his chest bleeding sand and blood. She grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her toward the docks, her wound a fire that burned with every step. The glyphs were alive, his lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving. Bound to serve, a prisoner like her. The docks loomed, the ship's silhouette a promise of escape, but the dust surged, vipers rising from the cobblestones, their fangs glinting, coiling around Evelyn's legs, drawing blood that fed the street. Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the air tremble, her bandaged hands bleeding as she traced glyphs in the dust. The keeper stepped from the crowd, its claws scraping the air, its voice a roar, "Pay or perish." Evelyn's wound choked her, black tendrils snaking through her vision. And she knew the ritual's price was her, but the vow was eternal, and no ship could outrun it. Evelyn fought the vipers, her hands tearing at their coils, blood streaming, her wound a fire that refused to fade. Lila's chant was a scream, her bandaged hands bleeding, her eyes pleading. "You can't run. The vessel binds the vow." The keeper's claws sank into Evelyn's shoulders, blood welling, but she tore free, stumbling toward the ship, the docks a blur of crates and shouting sailors. The vipers dissolved, the dust stilling, Ankit's face sinking, the keeper's form fraying into nothing, its eyes dimming. The ship's gangplank was steps away, Lila gasping beside her, her bandaged hands trembling, her grief a mirror of Evelyn's guilt. The curse was in her, a shadow no sea could banish, but she boarded, the deck solid under her feet, the Nile's edge fading as the ship pulled away. The city shrank, its lights swallowed by the horizon, but Evelyn's wound pulsed, the black tendrils alive, the phantom heart a whisper of Ankit's rage. Lila's voice was a ghost. "It'll find you." The keeper, it's bound to the vow. Evelyn nodded, the truth a weight she'd carry beyond Egypt. The desert was behind them, but its wrath was in her, the curse of fire no distance could extinguish. As the ship sailed, The Nile rippled, a single eye watching until it vanished in the wake, and Evelyn knew. The pharaoh's vow was hers, and the debt would come due in dust and eternity. The ship cut through the Nile's dark waters, its engine a low growl that did little to drown the phantom pulse in Dr. Evelyn Carver's chest. The deck swayed beneath her. Cairo's lights, now a faint glow swallowed by the night, but the curse's weight was heavier than the sea ahead. Her satchel was empty, the obsidian shard's fragments left in Cairo's dust. Yet its viper-etched memory burned in her palm, a tether to the mummified heart's rhythm. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, pulsed steadily, black tendrils snaking through her heart, a mark of Ankit's unrelenting claim. Lila sat huddled against a crate, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her eyes fixed on the river as if its depths might spit up vipers or glyphs. The crew moved silently, their glances sharp, sensing the shadow that clung to their passengers. The tomb was far behind, but its call was in Evelyn's blood, Ankit's vow of fire that burned within, and the keeper's voice a hiss. The debt is yours. The air was thick with salt and river mud, but a faint decay followed Evelyn, a reminder of the tomb's breath. The hieroglyphs were constant torment. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal vow. That truth was her cage. She was the vessel, the lover reborn. The debt eternal, Lila's warning. The keeper's bound to the vow was a chain, and Evelyn felt it in her wound's fire, in the phantom heart that whispered Ankit's rage. The ship was bound for Alexandria, then Europe, a world that felt like a myth, but every mile was a defiance the curse wouldn't forgive. The stars above were sharp, their light carving shadows that curled like vipers across the deck, forming fleeting glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts that pulsed with her blood. A low hum broke the night, not from the river, but from within Evelyn, her wound flaring, black and alive. The deck's planks stirred, dust rising from cracks, forming a single viper that slithered toward her, its eyes glowing, its hiss whispering, "Ankit, Ankit." Lila's bandaged hands trembled, her voice a cracked whisper. "It's followed us. The curse, it's in the water." The crew paused, their lanterns flickering, one man muttering about sea spirits, his eyes darting to Evelyn. Her wound was a scream, and she felt Ankit's presence, not in the dust, but in her, his rage a heat that wasn't hers. The keeper's form flickered on the river's surface, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her, its voice a hiss, blood for blood. The ship rocked, the Nile churning, vipers rising from its depths, their fangs glinting, coiling around the hull. Their hisses a chorus of Ankit's name. Evelyn stumbled to the railing, her wound choking her, black tendrils snaking through her vision. The glyphs were alive, his lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving, bound to serve, a prisoner like her. Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the water tremble, her bandaged hands bleeding as she traced glyphs in the air. The crew shouted, one man slashing at the vipers with a pole, but they were relentless, their fangs grazing the deck, drawing blood that mixed with the rivers. The keeper stepped onto the ship, its claws scraping the planks, its voice a roar, pay or perish. Evelyn's hands were empty, the shard gone, but her wound was her offering, her blood the ritual's price. She tore at the vipers, her hands bleeding, her wound a fire that burned for Ankit. Lila lunged, her bandaged hands grabbing Evelyn, her voice a scream, "Don't give in. The vessel binds the vow." The keeper's claws sank into Lila's shoulders, blood welling, her scream cut short as she fell, her burned hands twitching. Evelyn's vision blurred, Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands clean, her voice silent. The ritual demanded her, but Lila's words echoed, "If you die, he's free. She fought the vipers, her blood mixing with the water, her wound a fire that refused to fade. The river surged, forming a heart that pulsed with her blood, Ankit's face rising, his viper crown hissing, his wound bleeding her name. Evelyn screamed, not for mercy but defiance, her wound her anchor, her life the lock. She plunged her hands into the water, blood welling, the ship shaking as if in pain. Ankit's form roared, his vipers dissolving, his eyes dimming. The keeper's form frayed, its claws releasing Lila, its eyes fading. The Nile stilled, the vipers sinking, the crew gasping, their lanterns steady. Lila's bandaged hands bled, her eyes wide with grief, her voice a ghost. It's not over. The keeper, it's waiting. Evelyn's wound was a faint pulse. The black tendrils alive, the curse a shadow no sea could banish. The ship sailed Alexandria closer, but Ankit's vow was in her, a fire no distance could extinguish. She helped Lila stand, her grief a mirror of Evelyn's guilt. As the river stretched ahead, the water rippled, a single eye watching until it vanished in the dark, and Evelyn knew the Pharaoh's vow was hers, and the keeper's gaze would follow her blood into eternity. The ship's deck was a fragile sanctuary, its creaking planks swaying under a starless sky as the Nile carried DR. Evelyn Carver toward Alexandria, toward a world that felt like a lie. The curse's weight was heavier than the river's pull, its fire burning in her veins despite the miles between her and the tomb. Her wound, where the keeper's claws had torn her flesh, pulsed faintly, black tendrils snaking through her heart, a mark of Ankit's unrelenting claim. The obsidian shard was gone, its viper-etched fragments scattered in Cairo's dust, but its phantom rhythm echoed in her chest, a whisper of the mummified heart that bound her to the Pharaoh's vow. Lila lay slumped against a crate, her burned hands bleeding through bandages, her breath shallow, her eyes haunted by the vipers that had risen from the river. The crew, diminished and silent, kept their distance, their lanterns casting shadows that curled like glyphs across the deck. The keeper's voice hissed in Evelyn's mind, "The debt is yours." The ritual's price was unpaid, and the sea ahead was no escape. The air was thick with salt and the faint decay that followed Evelyn, a reminder of the tomb's breath woven into her skin. The hieroglyphs were a constant torment. Ankit's lover, her face her own, plunging the dagger, his blood soaking the sand as he cursed her name. The keeper, once a man, had knelt beside him, his human eyes bound to an eternal task. That truth was her prison. She was the vessel, the lover reborn, the debt eternal. Lila's warning, the keeper's waiting, was a chain, and Evelyn felt it in her wound's pulse, in the phantom heart that whispered Ankit's rage. The ship was a fleeting refuge, its course set for Europe, but the curse was in her, a shadow no ocean could banish. The Nile's waters were smooth, but their calm was a lie, and the shadows on the deck formed fleeting glyphs, spirals, eyes, hearts that pulsed with her blood. A low hum broke the silence, not from the river, but from within Evelyn, her wound flaring black and alive. The deck's planks stirred, dust rising from cracks, forming a single eye that stared, its pupil glowing with the phantom heart's rhythm. Lila's bandaged hands trembled, her voice a cracked whisper. "It's here. Ankit, he's never gone." The crew froze, their lanterns flickering, one man muttering prayers, his eyes darting to Evelyn. Her wound was a scream, and she felt Ankit's presence, not in the dust, but in her, his rage a heat that wasn't hers. The keeper's form flickered on the water's surface, tall and fraying, its ember-like eyes fixed on her, its voice a hiss, blood for blood. The ship rocked, the Nile churning, vipers rising from its depths, their fangs glinting, coiling around the hull, their hisses a chorus. "Ankit, Ankit." Evelyn stumbled to the railing, her wound choking her, black tendrils snaking through her vision. The glyphs were alive, his lover, her dagger, his heart bound to a curse that demanded blood. The keeper's human face flashed, its eyes grieving. Bound to serve, a prisoner like her. Lila's chant returned, a guttural plea that made the water tremble, her bandaged hands bleeding as she traced glyphs in the air. The crew shouted, one man slashing at the vipers with a knife, but they were relentless, their fangs grazing the deck, drawing blood that mixed with the rivers. The keeper stepped onto the ship, its claws scraping the planks, its voice a roar, pay or perish. Evelyn's hands were empty, the shard gone, but her wound was her offering, her blood the ritual's price. She tore at the vipers, her hands bleeding, her wound a fire that burned for Ankit. Lila crawled to her, her bandaged hands grabbing Evelyn's leg, her voice a scream. You're the vessel. Don't let him take you. The keeper's claws sank into Evelyn's shoulders, blood welling, but she fought, her hands plunging into the water, blood mixing with the Niles. The river surged, forming a heart that pulsed with her blood, Ankit's face rising, his viper crown hissing, his wound bleeding her name. Evelyn's vision blurred. Ankit's lover, her face her own, her hands clean, her voice silent. The ritual demanded her, but Lila's words echoed. If you die, he's free. She screamed, not for mercy but defiance. Her wound her anchor, her life the lock. The water stilled, the vipers sinking, Ankit's form dissolving, the keeper's claws releasing her, its eyes fading. The ship steadied, the crew gasping, their prayers a sob. Lila's bandaged hands bled, her eyes wide with grief, her voice a ghost. It's not over. The keeper, it's eternal. Evelyn's wound was a faint pulse, the black tendrils alive, the curse a shadow no sea could banish. The ship sailed, Alexandria's lights faint on the horizon, but Ankit's vow was in her, a fire no distance could extinguish. She helped Lila sit, her grief a mirror of Evelyn's guilt. The Nile was behind them, but the curse was ahead, a question unanswered. What was the debt's true price? As the ship moved, the water rippled, a single viper watching until it vanished in the dark. And Evelyn knew. The Pharaoh's vow was hers, and eternity would claim her blood. Hey, this is Eli Nightfall, and I hope the mummy's curse kept you on the edge of your seat. If this tale of ancient wrath and unrelenting curses gripped you, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think Evelyn's next move should be? Subscribe and ring the bell for more horror audiobooks that dig into the shadows of the past. Support the channel to keep these stories alive, and let's unravel the next mystery together.